City X, the Burton family's ancestral home. Outside the window, a cold wind howled as snowflakes swirled through the air. Camille, dressed in a pure white, luxurious wedding gown, gazed at her exquisitely made-up reflection in the vanity mirror. Today, she would finally marry the person she had loved for 3 years. Just as she was immersed in the joy of happiness, the terrified clamor of servants suddenly erupted outside the door. Camille was startled and immediately rose to go out. At that very moment, the door was suddenly burst open, and the butler, Uncle Wang, stumbled in with a disheveled expression. He urgently cried, "Miss, you must leave quickly. Alexander has brought the police to arrest the master and mistress." Camille froze, standing rigidly in place. This can't be. Alexander was her husband. How could he possibly come to arrest her parents? A deep, icy voice came from outside. He's not wrong. Alexander walked in dressed in a black suit. His posture upright and imposing. The man's features were sharp and refined, the frameless glasses on his face glinting coldly. Under the bright lights, his every movement exuded an air of aristocratic elegance. Yet the chill radiating from him was particularly biting. Camille threw herself at Alexander, clutching his collar tightly. "Where are my parents? Where's my brother?" Benjamin jumped to his death. "As for the others, they've already been arrested." Alexander parted his thin lips, uttering words of cruel finality. Camille seemed to have all strength drained from her body. Collapsing limply onto the floor, Alexander locked the door behind him, shutting the butler out. Camille looked up at the man, still unable to believe. Why? She didn't understand. Alexander was her brother's close friend, the junior most valued by her father, and her husband. Alexander yanked the woman up from the ground and threw her onto the bed. Why? He let out a cold laugh, leaning over her. "Because this is what your Burton family owes me." He rudely tore at Camille's wedding dress, along with shredding her heart into pieces. Camille struggled desperately. "Then why don't you just kill me?" Alexander pinned her hands above her head with a cold smirk. "Death would be too merciful for you." With that, without waiting for Camille to react, he pressed forward. Pain instantly overwhelmed her entire body. Camille couldn't help but shed tears. Alexander tore off the veil and threw it in her face. "The sight of your face disgusts me." These words struck like a heavy blow. Camille felt them pierce her heart. She closed her eyes in despair, passively enduring the venting and rage. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally got up, dressed, and left without looking back. From that day onward, Camille ran a persistent high fever, tormented by nightmares day and night. In her dreams, she was trapped in complete darkness. At times, the sound of a woman's crying could be heard, and at other times, the angry roar of Alexander. But what she heard most was her father calling her Camille. She dreamed of her wedding day, her father beaming with joy. "This is my precious daughter, will surely be happy for a lifetime." Her mother and brother stood to the side, smiling gently. Her father held her hand and personally escorted her to the wedding car, repeating his advice: "If you're ever wronged, just come back. No one is allowed to bully my little princess." She nodded with tears in her eyes. Amid the swirling snow, the motorcade grandly departed from the Burton family's estate. Reluctantly, she rolled down the car window to look back. Watching as the 3 figures gradually disappeared into the heavy snowfall, she couldn't help reaching out to grasp something. But suddenly the dream plunged into endless darkness. After what felt like an eternity, she awoke from her stupor and saw the nanny who had cared for her since childhood, Auntie Emily. Auntie Emily embraced her with tearful excitement. "Miss, you've been asleep for 3 days. The doctor said if you didn't wake up soon, you'd become a vegetable." Camille remained motionless. After waking up, she neither ate nor drank. No matter how Auntie Emily tried to persuade her, she just stared blankly into the distance. Like a soulless puppet. That night, Alexander pushed the door open. Bringing in a gust of cold air, he strode forward, yanking Camille off the bed, his face impatient. "Are you on a hunger strike?" Camille remained indifferent, her eyes hollow. Alexander grabbed the medicine bottle from the table with one hand, pinched her chin with the other, and prepared to force the pills into her mouth. Camille struggled desperately, knocking the medicine bottle out of his hand. The bottle fell with a clatter, scattering white pills across the floor. The man's gloomy face seemed to freeze over with coldness. "Very well." Camille weakly leaned against the bedside, stubbornly lifting her head to confront him. Alexander casually picked up 2 pills, pulling her into his embrace with one hand. Camille tightly pressed her lips together, only to see him place the pills in his mouth before lowering his head to seal her lips. The bitter taste of medicine quickly spread between their lips and teeth. The woman's soft lips continuously stimulated Alexander. He deepened the kiss, even wishing to lose himself in it. Slap. The crisp sound of a slap echoed piercingly in the silent room. Alexander had his face turned aside by the blow. But instead of anger, he smiled. Lifting his head to wipe the blood from his lips, he reached out and gripped Camille's neck, his voice low. Want revenge? Then survive by any means. I'll be waiting. With that, he threw her to the ground and walked away. From then on, Camille was imprisoned. The bridal chamber once meticulously prepared by her family had now become her cage, the height of irony. At this thought, Camille couldn't help but sneer, still able to laugh. Seems like things aren't miserable enough for you yet. Camille looked up toward the door at the sound of the voice, where a familiar figure swaggered in. Catherine. Back then, everyone knew she and Catherine were as close as sisters, and her father was also a founding member of the company. But now, her best friend and her beloved husband have joined forces to ruin her family. You ungrateful wretches, may you die a horrible death, Camille cursed in fury. Catherine couldn't help but laugh. Miss Camille is still being stubborn even now. Playing with her freshly done nails, she leaned close to Camille's ear and whispered, "You don't know yet, do you? Today your mother and brother are being sent to prison, the kind that holds the most dangerous criminals." In an instant, Camille's mind went blank as she frantically ran outside. Catherine smiled triumphantly behind her. Camille stumbled along the way, her feet cut and bleeding, yet she felt no pain. She ran forward desperately, faster, even faster. Just as Camille arrived at the police station by taxi, her legs gave way, and she collapsed to her knees. There, she saw her mother and brother torn apart by a massive truck. The bright red blood covered the ground, yet she recognized them at a glance. It was her mother, who had doted on her endlessly since childhood, and her brother, who had always showered her with boundless love and indulgence. Tears streamed down Camille's face and dripped onto the floor. Until now, she hadn't shed a single tear, because she refused to believe it. But now, the bloody truth lay before her, and she could no longer deceive herself. The long-suppressed emotions finally erupted at this moment. Camille felt a sudden warmth in her throat, and a mouthful of blood gushed out. She lay on the ground, breathing heavily and with difficulty. The former young lady of noble birth had fallen to such a state, and everyone was whispering about it. After a long while, the woman crouching on the ground suddenly laughed. Camille stood up, laughing like a madman. Her mouth full of blood was terrifying. Alexander returned to the Burton family old house, and before he could enter, he saw Auntie Emily rushing out in a panic. "Mr. Alexander, the young lady is missing." Hearing this, his heart suddenly sank, and he strode out. "Everyone, go look for her." Until nightfall, there was still no news. The man sitting in the living room had a gloomy expression, exuding a chilling aura. It wasn't until 10 p.m. that the phone suddenly rang with an incoming call. Alexander picked up the phone and immediately heard the panicked voice of his assistant on the other end. "Mr. Alexander, something terrible has happened. MS. Camille is standing on the police station rooftop threatening to jump." Hearing this, Alexander's eyes darkened. "I'm on my way." After hanging up the phone, he immediately rushed out of the house. 20 minutes later, on the police station rooftop, Alexander rushed to the police station only to see Camille standing on the rooftop in thin clothes. The biting cold wind lifted her waterfall-like black hair, her figure teetering precariously, a sight that was utterly heart-stopping. He sprinted toward her, shouting, "Camille, come down." Camille turned at the sound of his voice, her face wearing a nearly hopeless smile. "Alexander, you deceived me so cruelly. I married you with high hopes, only to receive the news that you killed my family. Tell me, am I not a fool?" Her words dripped with blood as she slowly descended from the rooftop to stand before him. Alexander frowned. "It was a mutual agreement. Where's the deception?" Camille gave a bitter smile. "Yes, a mutual agreement." With that, she pulled out a concealed fruit knife and stabbed straight at his chest. Alexander did not dodge, enduring the stab head-on. "Do you hate me this much?" he asked in a low voice. Suppressing the pain from his chest, Camille did not answer. The two stood close, their breaths mingling, and he could clearly see the hatred burning in the woman's eyes. Alexander held his breath, abruptly pushing her away. Camille stumbled and fell to the ground. Suddenly, she gripped a fruit knife and fiercely thrust it toward her own neck. Just as Camille embraced her resolve to die, a large hand suddenly blocked the scissors. The sharp blade sliced through the man's palm, blood gushing out and dripping onto Camille's white dress. A stark and glaring sight. Alexander stared darkly at Camille, his voice low and threatening. "If you dare die, I'll make everyone in the Burton family mansion accompany you to the grave." With that, he snatched the fruit knife and flung it aside with force. Camille sat on the ground, closing her eyes in despair as tears rolled down her cheeks. That night, Alexander brought her back to the Burton family's old mansion. He also assigned additional bodyguards, leaving her with no way to escape. These days was always snowing. The heavy snow fell endlessly, blanketing the courtyard and making it appear even more desolate. For half a month straight, Alexander hadn't visited the old house. Camille naturally had no desire to see him either, until one day, JK Group's secretary came to the door. "Miss Camille, Mr. Alexander wants you to come to the company." Auntie Emily looked at her worriedly. "Miss, this." Camille softly reassured, "It's okay, Auntie Emily, I'll be back soon." In the car, Camille quietly closed her eyes, but a faint unease lingered in her heart. As soon as she arrived at the company, the secretary escorted her to the second-floor lounge of the conference room. Gazing at the familiar conference table below, Camille momentarily lost herself in thought. When she was little, she and her brother were often brought here by their father for meetings. Whenever they saw their father overwhelmed with work, her brother would vow, "When I grow up, I'll definitely help Dad share his burdens." Lost in thought, a man's voice interrupted her memories. Camille turned toward the sound. The group's directors filed in one after another, quickly filling the conference room. Sitting at the head of the table was none other than Alexander, dressed in a perfectly tailored haute couture suit. His expression was cool and detached, resembling an elegant nobleman. Yet, paradoxically, such a man harbored boundless ambition in private. Camille stared fixedly at Alexander, her eyes surging with waves of hatred. At that moment, a woman in a V-neck dark gown walked in from outside and slowly approached Alexander. Alexander wrapped his arm around the woman and announced, "Let me introduce everyone to my wife, the future mistress of JK Group." The woman slowly lifted her face, and the moment Camille saw her features, she felt as if struck by lightning. It turned out to be Catherine. Blood rushed to her head. Camille wanted to charge forward, but several secretaries immediately stepped forward to restrain her, leaving her helpless to watch. Watching Alexander gently take Catherine's hand, receiving congratulations from the company directors, wishing the two of you a harmonious union lasting 100 years, and growing old together with white hair, Camille thought her heart had long stopped aching. Yet tears fell like pearls from a broken string. After the meeting, she was taken to the CEO's office. Alexander then entered, and the secretary quietly left. "How does it feel?" Camille looked up at him, her voice hoarse. "Did you keep me just to torment me?" "Yes, I want you to watch the Burton family's everything fall into my hands. The more you suffer, the more I enjoy it." As he spoke, Alexander forcefully tore open the dress on her body, exposing her snow-white skin. "Here, miss." "Camille must be having quite a unique experience," Alexander said with a playful glint in his eyes. Camille panicked and struggled. "Let me go. This used to be her father's office." Alexander was truly determined to make her life a living hell. The man lowered his head to capture her lips, plundering her sweetness without restraint. Camille was pinned against the floor-to-ceiling window by Alexander. The transparent glass reflected every humiliating detail of her ordeal. From the fading sunset to the deep night, the torment finally came to an end. Alexander, now fully dressed, summoned his assistant. Assistant Buck pushed the door open and said respectfully, "Mr. Alexander, what are your orders?" Alexander looked cold and left no room for negotiation. "Take Camille to the outskirts and lock her up. No one is to see her without my command." The Carter residence, inside the study. "Alexander, what are you thinking about?" A charming female voice came through. Alexander snapped back to reality, only to realize he was holding the documents upside down. He set down the documents and took Catherine's offered glass of warm water. Taking a sip, "It's nothing. If something's bothering you, maybe you should talk to me about it," Catherine said gently. "I said I'm fine," Alexander replied somewhat displeased. "Alexander, you're not falling for Camille, are you? Your father was the one who caused your parents' death." Catherine hesitated for a moment before she couldn't help but remind him. Alexander paused mid-sip of water. "Impossible. That's good. My father mentioned earlier that Camille can't stay." "Enough. I know my limits," Alexander interrupted her coolly, rising to leave. Watching the man's retreating figure, Catherine clenched her palm in resentment, overturning the water glass with a sharp motion. Suburban villa. The villa had been abandoned for a long time, with dust covering every surface inside. A biting cold wind continuously poured in through the window. Camille, her lips turning purple from the cold, yet she didn't utter a word. Before this, she never knew she could endure hardship. Even the accompanying Auntie Emily couldn't help but speak up. Mr. Alexander truly has no conscience. You're so frail. How could he send you to such a place? Camille shook her head with a bitter smile. Auntie Emily. It's all right. For several days in a row, the servants only delivered cold leftovers for every meal, infuriating Auntie Emily, who kept cursing, but to no avail. We can still eat it if we heat it up. Camille reached for the bowl. A pair of red high heels kicked the rice bowl far away. Camille paused her hand and looked up to see Catherine wrapped in fur. Catherine raised a hand to lightly cover her nose, her face full of disdain. This is truly filthy, not even comparable to my dog's kennel. Camille stood up and coldly demanded, "What are you doing here?" Catherine approached, her voice sharp. "I just felt sorry for you and came specifically to see you." Camille felt a chill in her heart. "I've treated you well all these years. When exactly did you start colluding with Alexander?" Catherine curved her red lips into a smirk. "I was already with Alexander before I even met you. I only got close to you for revenge. What you thought was deep affection was just part of our plan." Every word she spoke pierced Camille's heart like a sharp sword. No wonder he understood her so well. It was all a lie. His kindness was just a ploy to deceive her. "The fool, you're despicable and shameless," Camille shouted angrily, her eyes red with fury. Catherine sneered. "Do you still think you're the JK Group's precious young miss? A stray dog like you dares to insult JK's CEO's wife. Beat her to death." At her command, two servants rushed forward and surrounded Camille. The crisp sound of slaps echoed through the empty villa as the restrained Camille bled profusely. "Miss," Auntie Emily cried out, her body firmly restrained by the servants. "Night." Camille sat dazed in the chair, her fair cheeks already swollen and red. Blood stained the corner of her lips, yet she felt no pain at all. Auntie Emily entered the room with a damp towel, carefully applying a cold compress to her. Looking at Camille's swollen face, she couldn't stop sobbing. "Miss, you've suffered so much." Camille silently removed the towel. "It's okay, Auntie Emily, it's getting late, you should go rest too." With that, she lay straight on the bed, burying her face in the pillow, letting the tears soak through. Half asleep, Camille was suddenly awakened by a thick cloud of smoke. When I got up, the room was already engulfed in flames. She quickly ran out of the room and woke the sleeping Auntie Emily. "There's a fire, run." The two supported each other as they ran to the door. But the fire was too intense, and the swaying cabinet at the entrance was about to collapse at any moment. Camille had no time to think. In the last second before the cabinet fell, she pushed Auntie Emily out with all her strength. By the time Alexander arrived with help, the raging fire was like a dragon, wildly ravaging with claws bared. Auntie Emily was crying out while desperately throwing water to fight the flames, but it was ultimately a futile effort. As the other servants simply stood by and watched, seeing Alexander, she rushed forward. "Mr. Alexander, the young lady is still inside. Please save her." Alexander's face darkened, while his assistant Buck quickly dialed 119, shouting at the servants, "What are you standing around for? Put out the fire." Inside the burning building, Camille lay on the ground, barely alive. The thick smoke made it almost impossible to breathe, and her body grew increasingly heavy in her dazed consciousness. She vaguely saw Alexander rush in with a look of urgency. "They say people only hallucinate when they're about to die. Was she dying? Maybe dying like this wouldn't be so bad." Camille thought as her awareness gradually faded. Rose Villa. Camille woke up again, her eyes taking in the sight of an exquisitely unfamiliar little Western-style house. Auntie Emily exclaimed with delight by her ear. "Miss, you're awake." Camille tried to speak, but her throat felt as if pierced by needles. She winced in pain, her brows furrowing tightly as she asked with difficulty, "Who saved me?" Auntie Emily sobbed. "It was the firefighters who came and brought you out. Thank goodness you're all right." As she spoke, Auntie Emily began to cry quietly. Camille stared blankly, the hope in her heart extinguished. She was being presumptuous. Alexander would never come to save her. In the following days, Camille was taken by Auntie Emily for walks in the courtyard to relax. That day, a conversation between two servants drifted through the courtyard. "Did you hear? All the previous servants were fired." "Why is that?" "I heard the fire that day was caused by a servant's carelessness. The storage room caught fire." Mr. Alexander was furious. "How terrifying. Poor young mistress." "What young mistress? She doesn't deserve that title now." Camille listened, feeling a pang of bitterness in her heart. Indeed, she was no longer any young miss. Alexander, so who was he putting on a show for? Midnight. Camille lay on the bed, drowsy and half asleep. Suddenly, she felt the bed dip beside her, and a scorching hand settled on her waist. These days he comes every night, not saying a word. Only endlessly taking, until the sky lightens at dawn, he quietly leaves again. Meanwhile, at the Carter family villa, say that again. The master has gone to see Camille again, the assistant replied with downcast eyes. That bitch. Why didn't the fire burn her to death? Catherine snarled, her face twisted with rage. The butler quickly interjected, Madam, please don't be upset. No matter how Mr. Alexander plays around with women, you're the only Mrs. Hearing this, Catherine's expression softened slightly. Exactly, she's Mrs. Crushing that bitch would be as easy as lifting a finger for her. A few days later, inside the villa, Camille noticed that the day was almost over, yet she hadn't seen Auntie Emily at all. A sense of unease crept into her heart as she asked a nearby maid, Auntie Emily, where is she? The servant shook her head. Miss, I don't know. Camille furrowed her brows and was about to go out to search when she bumped into two figures. It was Alexander and Catherine. Camille turned to leave, but Catherine shouted, Stop. She shot a cold glance over. Catherine instinctively shut her mouth. Alexander said coldly, Camille, where are your manners? Camille scoffed, You're not worthy. Alexander darkened his expression. Have you forgotten you're nothing but a stray dog now? With that, he kicked her knee, sending her straight to the ground. How does it feel to kneel before someone? Alexander said in a deep voice. Back then, my parents begged just like this, but your father turned a blind eye. Camille felt a sharp pain in her chest and bit her lip. I might as well be kneeling before a dog, Alexander said with deep, intense eyes, since your bones are so unyielding. Then kneel until they soften. After speaking, he left with Catherine, not sparing her a single glance. After an unknown amount of time, Camille's knees beneath her were bruised purple, the cold seeping relentlessly into the very marrow of her bones. The sky began to snow again. Camille shivered all over from the cold, yet a sudden image flashed through her mind. Her family gathered together listening to her father tell stories. It was on a similarly freezing night back then. Gradually, the snow grew heavier until she could no longer hold on, and her frail body collapsed into the snow. Seeing this, the servants in the villa quickly rushed Camille to the hospital. On the other side, inside the CEO's office, Assistant Buck walked in with a phone. His expression complicated. Mr. Alexander, Miss Camille is pregnant. Camille woke up to find Assistant Buck by her side. Miss is awake. I'll go call Mr. Alexander. What is he up to now? Camille immediately became alert. You're pregnant, Mr. Alexander values this child greatly and wants you to take good care of yourself during the pregnancy. She was pregnant with Alexander's child. Camille felt all the blood rush to her head. Bed rest, furious. She pulled out the 4-tube from her hand and got up to leave, but she ran straight into Alexander walking in. Seeing the blood on the back of her hand, he slightly frowned. You don't want to carry my child. Camille eyes red with anger. Your child only makes me sick. Alexander sneered. You used to adore me so much, and now you've forgotten. I must have been blind. Recalling the past, she felt as if her sincerity had been fed to a dog. Alexander walked up to her, eyeing her with an amused expression. Yet Miss Camille seemed to enjoy herself quite a bit beneath me, didn't she? Camille felt her heart tremble as she raised her hand to strike. Alexander caught her wrist first. I only want this child. If it's born safely, the Burton family's servants will be unharmed. If not, they'll all be buried with it. With that, he shoved Camille aside and turned to leave. Her eyes reddened, overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. The Carter family villa. The mess all over the floor indicates that the house has experienced a storm. Catherine was panting heavily, her face twisted in fury. Alexander actually wants to keep that child, she said viciously. The assistant advised, Madam, don't let anger harm your health. I think we could consult Mr. Devon about this matter. You're right. I can't just sit and wait for doom. I must find father. Catherine stood up and walked out. Soon it was New Year's Eve, and the JK group hosted a cocktail party. At the party, glasses clinked amid lively conversations. As if the upheaval in the Burton family had never occurred, Camille watched everything coldly. Those who once followed her father's lead were now fawning over Alexander. She didn't understand Alexander's intention in summoning her, but the moment she entered, the gazes of the crowd had already dissected her with silent judgment. Why had the Burton family's young lady appeared at the enemy's banquet? She picked up the red wine and drank it all in one gulp, struggling to maintain her last shred of dignity. Catherine took in everything with a satisfied smile. This is just the beginning. the real show is yet to come. The assistant stepped forward and announced, "Today is the company's annual gala, and Mrs. has prepared gifts for everyone." The gift was an ordinary souvenir, but only Camille had nothing in her hands. Alexander glanced over, his gaze settling on her, and couldn't help but frown. Many employees also noticed Camille. Camille didn't get one. After all, she's the daughter of Mr. Burton. Now she only has that little bit of shares. How can she still be considered part of the company? Camille turned a deaf ear. Catherine was in high spirits at the sight, feigning remorse. She said, "Camille, I'm sorry. Since you joined the party at the last minute, I didn't have time to prepare a gift for you." As soon as these words were spoken, the room fell silent. Camille said coldly, "I don't need your things." Catherine said with grievance, "You've misunderstood me, Alexander." Alexander had a cold glint in his eyes. He hated Camille like this. "Since you don't need it, then pay me the rent for staying at my place these days. If you can't afford it, clean to pay it off." Camille looked up and met his unwavering gaze. Her heart ached, and she bit her lip as she quickly left the party. 2 hours later, inside the villa, Camille returning to the villa. A servant thrust a broom into her hands. "Can't even pay rent, yet acting like a spoiled young lady. Go sweep the snow." Immersive translate, early morning, inside the villa. Alexander had just stepped through the door when Auntie Emily rushed over. Kneeling before him in tears, "Sir, please save the young mistress, she's at death's door." The man's face darkened as he turned and led the group swiftly into the courtyard. In the courtyard, Camille was sweeping snow in thin clothing. Her shoulders covered in heavy snowfall, her mind was foggy, each step feeling as if she were treading on knife blades, while intermittent cramps throbbed in her lower abdomen. In her daze, she faintly heard Auntie Emily's voice. She turned around and saw that every inch of the snow-covered ground she had walked on was stained red with blood. The next second, Camille collapsed into the snow, her strength completely drained. Alexander's face suddenly changed, and he hurriedly picked up Camille. Carrying her back to the villa and laying her on the bed, he turned to the family doctor and said, "You must save the child, or I'll make sure none of you can practice medicine ever again." The doctor, covered in cold sweat, hurried forward to check. Alexander stood aside, his brows tightly furrowed. Remembering Camille's stubbornness, a surge of anger rose in his heart. Immersive translate, Camille opened her eyes again to find the room brightly lit, her gaze fixed on the figure beside her. "Do you really not want to keep this child?" The man's voice betrayed no emotion. Camille stared blankly. "This is just a cursed seed, it shouldn't be born." Alexander suddenly stood up, walked to the bedside, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You really don't know what's good for you." He threw a pair of gold-rimmed glasses at Camille, stained with blood. "I heard the old butler of the Burton family never takes off his glasses. Do you think these look nice?" Alexander's low voice reached Camille's ears like a demon's whisper. Camille, her pupils contracted as she reached out in disbelief to touch her glasses. Before she could make contact, the man forcefully gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "This is just a warning. If there's a next time, it won't be as simple as just gouging out his eyes." Span. Camille, shocked and furious, she met the man's unfathomable eyes, a chill running down her spine. A few days later, late at night, Auntie Emily brought hot milk as usual. Camille drank it in one gulp. Shortly after drinking it, she felt dizzy and fell asleep leaning against the bed. In the middle of the night, she seemed to sense someone beside her, and her heart tightened. Before she could react, the door was kicked open. Catherine appeared at the doorway with Alexander in tow. She jolted awake from her daze, hastily pulling the blanket around her as she sat up, only to see a naked man lying on the bed. The man quickly scrambled off the bed and knelt before Alexander, pleading, "Mr. Alexander, please spare me. What I have with Mrs. Camille is true love." Camille froze, instantly realizing she had been set up. Alexander stared at the woman sitting on the bed with her delicate shoulders slightly exposed, then at the naked man kneeling before him, his face darkening with anger. "Camille, you're still pregnant right now. Even if you want to, you should restrain yourself," Catherine exclaimed. Camille was about to speak when the man cut in first. "Mr. Alexander, it's all my fault. Please don't blame the young lady." Still quite the romantic, Alexander gritted his teeth, enunciating each word slowly. Camille was startled and quickly retorted, "I don't even know you. Who exactly are you?" The man looked at Camille with a hurt expression. "Miss, since the truth is out, I submit to your judgment. Please take care of yourself, and I beg Mr. Alexander not to blame you." Alexander coldly commanded, "Take him away." The man was dragged out of the bedroom by 2 bodyguards. casting a flickering glance at Catherine before leaving. Alexander turned to Camille and asked, "Do you have anything else to say?" Camille gazed at the absurd scene before her, a tumult of emotions surging in her heart. After a long while, she actually laughed. "I have nothing to say." Alexander was furious, his hands tightly gripping Camille's slender, delicate neck. Behind him, Camille couldn't help but curl her alluring red lips, unable to conceal the triumph in her eyes. Camille's face turned crimson from suffocation. She squinted at Alexander, then slowly closed her eyes as if resigning herself to fate. Alexander released his grip and stepped back. Camille clutched her throat, gasping for air between violent coughs. His voice carried a chilling fury. "Were you trying to die for love?" Camille collapsed by the bedside, unable to speak, only staring at him with mocking eyes. "Call the doctor," Alexander shouted loudly. Camille closed her eyes, only hearing Alexander whisper in her ear, "Dying won't be that easy. I'll make you wish you were dead." Early the next morning, Camille had her neck wrapped in thick bandages. Assistant Buck walked in and said, Mr. Alexander has ordered you to come with me." Camille was taken to the crematorium. At the entrance of the crematorium, Alexander said with icy eyes, "It's been so long since you've seen your parents, hasn't it? Today, I'll take you to see them." Camille felt a tightness in her heart before she could speak. Alexander grabbed her arm and pulled her into the crematorium. On a shelf not far away, 3 urns were prominently displayed. Camille halted in her steps, her heart wrenched with pain. She struggled to get past, but was Alexander forcefully restrained. She shook her head, her voice hoarse. "Mom, Dad, brother." Alexander relaxed his grip. Camille rushed forward to clutch the urn, weeping uncontrollably. Her collar was yanked. Alexander dragged her away. She looked at the man, 2 clear tears streaming down. "Let them rest in peace, please." Alexander let go. Camille fell to the ground. He curled his lips coldly and said unhurriedly, "Want to rest in peace? Kowtow to me, and for every 100, I'll bury one." For a moment, the crematorium fell into complete silence. Camille stared at Alexander, her lips trembling slightly. "Really?" Alexander darkened his eyes and said coldly, "Of course." Camille slowly knelt before him, her face streaked with tears. She trembled as she closed her eyes and lowered herself to the ground in a kowtow. Thud, 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 1, 2, 130. After countless kowtows, Camille saw nothing but a crimson haze before her eyes, the floor now smeared with blood. Alexander stood motionless, his thin lips pressed together as he watched this spectacle unfold. 264, Camille counted, her mind in a daze. Unable to get up for a long time, she gasped for breath, her remaining consciousness telling her she must get up. For her parents and brother, she dug her nails fiercely into the ground, leaving bloody marks, trying to push herself up, but collapsed heavily from exhaustion. The surrounding staff couldn't bear to watch and turned their heads away. Camille finally mustered the strength to kowtow once more. 200. Before she could finish speaking, darkness engulfed her vision as she fainted dead away. When she awoke again, she was back at the villa. Alexander was still there. He approached, his gaze disdainful. "Ms. Camille is awake. What a shame to have missed such a spectacle." Camille tried to push herself up but was too dizzy to move. "What happened to my family?" "You said you only kowtowed 273 times. Enough to bury 2. The rest I smashed." Alexander looked at her, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Camille froze. "Ms. Camille, if you'd practiced kowtowing more often, couldn't you have buried your entire family properly?" Alexander curled his lips in a smirk, neither smiling nor not smiling. Camille grabbed the man's clothes, her eyes red with fury. "You beast!" Alexander was seething with rage as he pinned Camille onto the bed, his hands sliding up beneath her clothes. She gasped in shock, instinctively shielding her abdomen. Alexander scowled darkly. "Once this bastard is born, I'll deal with him properly." Camille cried out in pain, further arousing the man. His movements grew more forceful as the bedroom echoed with panting breaths. After releasing his pent-up desires, Alexander found himself craving more. Fully dressed, he gazed at the woman on the bed. "She said she wants to see you. We'll head to Carter's place soon." 1 hour later, at the Carter family's villa, Catherine stared at Camille's mottled marks, her eyes filled with jealousy and hatred. "That man. You arranged it, didn't you?" Camille looked up at her. Catherine froze for a moment before regaining her composure. "What are you talking about? I don't understand," Camille said clearly. "Is this fun?" Catherine chuckled. "So what can you do about it?" She stepped forward and slapped Camille across the face. "Even if I hit you like this, all you can do is shut up and take it." Camille raised her hand as if to strike back. Catherine shouted sharply, "Guards, hold her down for me. Today I'll teach this homewrecker a proper lesson." The servants pinned Camille down. Camille sneered, "If you want to torture me, you don't need so many excuses." Catherine lifted her chin gently, whispering softly, "I'll send you and the bastard in your womb straight to hell right now." As she spoke, she raised her foot to Camille's belly, ready to kick down. Just then, a voice suddenly came from the doorway. "Alexander S., where is my wife?" Catherine's eyes flickered with a trace of panic. "What's going on here?" Alexander's voice carried natural authority. The assistant hurried forward and said, "Sir." She started cursing at Madame as soon as she saw her and even tried to hit her. Alexander's expression darkened slightly upon hearing this. He glanced at Camille kneeling on the ground. He took Catherine's hand and asked gently, "Are you hurt?" Catherine put on a show of being wronged and said, "I'm fine, Alexander, don't worry about me." Camille watched the intimate exchange between the two, feeling as if her heart had been hollowed out. What made it even worse was that she still felt pain for him. Alexander spoke in a cold voice. "Disrespecting my wife is disrespecting me. Let the Carter family household rules deal with this." The Carter family discipline, beaten with a wooden rod until the back is torn and bleeding. The child would certainly not survive. Camille felt a pang in her heart and looked up at the man. "Do you truly intend to do this? Are you still pleading for the bastard in your belly?" Alexander scowled with undisguised malice. She had long ceased to fear death, regretting only that she had not avenged her family. Camille sneered, "He truly deserves to die. Why don't you do it yourself?" Alexander felt a flicker of unease in his heart, quickly replaced by anger. Assistant Buck couldn't help but advise, "Mr. Alexander, the young lady can't endure this." Alexander glared at him and signaled the servants to proceed. The stick came down. Camille couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. She clenched her teeth, refusing to make a sound. As beads of sweat rolled down her forehead, Alexander grew even angrier. "Didn't you eat?" The servant panicked and could only increase the force of their strikes. The heavy wooden stick struck her body repeatedly. Camille turned deathly pale as excruciating pain surged through her back. Feeling a warm trickle slide down between her legs, "Mr. Alexander, she's bleeding. Perhaps we should," Assistant Buck said nervously. The man merely glanced sideways at him. "Continue." Camille felt her child slipping away from her. This should have been a joyous occasion, yet her heart felt as if it were being torn apart. Tears silently fell, mingling with blood as they dripped to the ground. "Don't be afraid, Mommy will be with you soon," she murmured deliriously. Gradually, even the murmurs ceased, leaving only the sound of the wooden stick striking flesh. "Enough," Alexander shouted angrily. Catherine was also startled. He quickly stepped forward and saw Camille with her eyes tightly closed. Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. To the hospital, he scooped up the blood-covered woman and rushed out of the villa. Inside private hospital, Assistant Buck said cautiously, "Mr. Alexander, the baby is gone. Where is she?" Alexander asked in a low voice. "The young lady has woken up." Alexander entered the hospital room. The woman on the bed opened her eyes, expressionless. "Are you so heartbroken over losing that bastard child?" His tone remained cruel. Camille stared at him with hollow eyes. After a long silence, the corners of her lips curled into a smile. "Is your child's blood redder than my family's?" Alexander's pupils trembled, his hands clenched tightly. Assistant Buck suddenly exclaimed, "There's blood on the bed." Alexander looked over to see a pool of crimson spreading beneath Camille, staining the pristine white sheets. "Call the doctor." Now, Camille felt her eyelids growing heavier. She heard Alexander erupt in anger after the doctor mentioned the high risks, his tone betraying a hint of nervousness. She just found it amusing. He must be regretting not having the chance to torment her anymore. The noise gradually faded, and she sank into darkness. This time, she was finally going to be free. Suddenly, a woman's voice rang out, "Miss, you must hold on. The young master is still waiting for you." After a whole night of emergency treatment at the hospital, Camille was finally out of danger and transferred to a regular ward, but when she would wake up remained unknown. JK Group, CEO's office, Devon took out a document and said solemnly, "Alexander, we all believe that Camille needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. If she manages to turn the tables, we'll be the ones who suffer." Assistant Buck took the document and respectfully handed it to Alexander. Alexander didn't even look up, casually placing the document aside. "I have my own arrangements for this matter." Devon saw this and his tone turned hostile. "Seems you've forgotten how Benjamin, jealous of your family's business, deliberately bankrupted you." and how debt collectors drove your parents to their deaths. Alexander tightened his grip on the pen upon hearing this. I haven't forgotten. Since you haven't forgotten, then deal with Camille immediately. I've said it before, I have my own arrangements for this matter. Alexander looked up, his voice gentle yet leaving no room for doubt. It's getting late, uncle, you should go now. With that, Alexander returned to his work. Devon was escorted out of the office by Assistant Buck, his eyes brimming with unconcealed malice. Carter residence, study room. Catherine approached the study, gazing at the man sitting upright as he handled his work. His chiseled profile appeared even more handsome under the lamplight, compelling her to step forward. A hint of bashfulness surfaced on her face. Alexander, you should rest early, so we can have a child sooner. Alexander darkened his gaze slightly, putting down the pen before countering with a question. Do you remember the man who was lying with Camille last time? Why yes, I remember. Why? Catherine felt somewhat guilty. For some reason, he looked familiar to me. Catherine tried hard to suppress the panic in her heart. Maybe Camille had already betrayed you long before this. Alexander pursed his thin lips tightly, his right hand tapping the desk intermittently. Alexander, let's rest early. Catherine stepped forward, attempting to take the man's arm. Alexander stood up just in time to avoid her, his tone somewhat cold. I hope you'll be a proper CEO's wife and not disappoint me. Alexander, feeling agitated, drove out aimlessly. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the hospital. As he entered the door, Auntie Emily quickly bowed. Sir, her tone was respectful, but not a trace of respect could be seen on her face. Alexander snorted coldly. Camille's servant was indeed as stubborn as she was. He couldn't be bothered to argue and walked past her into the hospital room. On the bed, the person lay quietly in deep slumber. Her long eyelashes cast shadows, and her usually lively eyes were tightly shut. The faint light fell upon her pale face, which looked serene yet deathly white. He should be happy to see her tormented like this, but now he just feels extremely irritated. Alexander gazed quietly for a while before walking out. Just as he stepped outside, his assistant Buck approached and handed him a document. Mr. Alexander, we've located someone who knew about the Carter family's incident back then, but it's been too long. There isn't much useful information left. Give it to me. Alexander took the document and flipped through it, reading the testimony written on it. It stated that Alexander's father, while drunk, was tricked by a stranger into signing a loan shark contract, but the identity of that man remained unknown. Yet Catherine's father never mentioned this matter. He only said that Benjamin had used the loan shark to drive his father to death. His hand holding the documents tightened slightly, his eyes dark and profound. Suddenly, from inside the hospital room came Auntie Emily's delighted voice. Miss, you're awake, Alexander said to his assistant Buck. Keep investigating. Then he turned and walked into the hospital room. A tall figure approached, and she looked up at him, her eyelashes fluttering, her eyes filled with confusion. Alexander looked displeased and was about to mock her. Unexpectedly, she asked in confusion, Who are you? The ward fell silent for a moment. Alexander frowned deeply, suppressing his anger as he said, Camille, what trick are you trying to pull now? He didn't believe the amnesia act for a second. It was just a beating that caused a miscarriage. How could she suddenly claim to have lost her memory? Auntie Emily held Camille's hand by the hospital bed, her face filled with sorrow, and choked out, Miss, do you really not remember anything? Camille turned her head at the voice and froze upon seeing Auntie Emily. Auntie Emily, didn't you take leave to return to your hometown? Why are you here? Auntie Emily paused mid-motion. That was something from 3 years ago. Why would the young mistress bring it up now? Her pupils constricted abruptly as she asked in disbelief, Young mistress, do you remember how old you are this year? Camille looked at Auntie Emily with confusion. Auntie Emily, what are you talking about? Didn't I just celebrate my 22nd birthday? As the words fell, Auntie Emily could no longer hold back her tears. Her poor young mistress had truly been tormented by Alexander to the point of losing her memory. Alexander had overheard the entire conversation between the two. Watching Camille's innocent expression, his irritation grew even stronger. He roared toward the door, Call the doctor. Soon the doctor arrived and carefully examined Camille. Alexander said in a deep voice, She really lost her memory. The doctor said with a grave expression, After examination, there are 2 possible reasons for the patient's memory loss. One is damage to the brain nerves, and the other is severe psychological trauma that has created a shadow, causing the patient to subconsciously avoid it, which is selective amnesia. Alexander laughed in extreme anger, stepped forward, and grabbed Camille's chin, his voice icy cold. "Camille, are you afraid of me?" Camille winced in pain, instinctively recoiling. Alexander was infuriated by her reaction, roughly shoving Camille away. "Let's see how long you can keep pretending." With that, he stormed out of the hospital room, barely containing his anger. Stepping out of the hospital room, Alexander ordered his assistant Buck, "Take her back to the Carter residence, have Catherine move out." Assistant Buck bowed respectfully and replied, "Yes, Mr. Alexander." Inside the Carter family villa, Catherine held her phone in disbelief, her voice shrill. "What? You're making me move out? I'm Alexander's wife, why should I have to leave?" Assistant Buck sounded extremely hesitant. "Madam, this is Mr. Alexander's order, I'm just following instructions." Catherine was furious and unwilling to let it go, pressing further. "Then who is this villa being vacated for?" "Camille." Assistant Buck avoided answering directly. "Ms. Camille has lost her memory. Sir wants her to recuperate properly at the Carter residence." Catherine grew even angrier, speaking without restraint. "That scheming woman has so many tricks up her sleeve. Who knows if this memory loss is just an act? Where is Alexander? Tell him to speak to me personally." The next second, Alexander's voice came through the phone. "Alexander, it was me who said it. Is that enough?" Catherine felt a lump in her throat but still refused to give up. "Alexander, have you forgotten how the Burtons treated you? How could you let Camille move into the Carter household?" Alexander said coldly, with a hint of impatience. "None of your business. Move out today." With that, the dial tone buzzed abruptly. Catherine clutched her phone, her expression murderous. The assistant beside her asked uneasily, "Madam, what should we do now?" Catherine waved her hand, and the phone was thrown to the ground, its screen shattered beyond recognition. She panted heavily, gritting her teeth. "That bitch, pretending to have amnesia. If that's the case, then I'll see what other tricks she has up her sleeve." "Move." Inside the hospital, Assistant Buck nervously took the phone. "Mr. Alexander, should we now arrange Ms. Camille's luggage?" Alexander's eyes darkened as he gazed out the window, his tone icy. "It's time to teach Catherine a lesson." That very night, Camille was taken back to the Carter family villa. Arriving in an unfamiliar environment for the first time, Camille appeared extremely uneasy. Clutching Auntie Emily's sleeve, she nervously said, "Auntie Emily, where is this? I want to go home." Auntie Emily felt her heart almost break upon hearing these words. How could she still find it in her heart to tell the young lady the truth at this point? Alexander stood nearby, his cold gaze fixed on Auntie Emily, the warning in his eyes unmistakable. Auntie Emily pursed her lips tightly, but ultimately didn't speak. Seeing Camille constantly on edge, Auntie Emily had no choice but to lie. "You've forgotten, miss. The master and the others have gone abroad recently to discuss a project. They were worried about leaving you home alone, so you're staying here for a few days." Camille cast a cautious glance at Alexander, her eyes filled with resistance. "Really?" Auntie Emily suppressed the tears in her eyes. "When have I ever lied to you? Let me take you to freshen up first." Camille obediently followed Auntie Emily upstairs. Alexander watched her thin figure recede, feeling nothing but irritation. He had never seen Camille like this before, resembling a newborn fawn. Her moist eyes held no hatred for him, only wariness toward all unfamiliar things. Finally, Camille returned to the bedroom wearing loose pajamas. As soon as she entered, she saw Alexander sitting by the bed and instinctively turned to leave. Alexander saw Camille in her pajamas, catching glimpses of her delicate skin through the loose neckline. He suddenly stood up, pressing the door shut with one hand while gripping Camille's wrist with the other. "So unwilling to see me." Camille teared up, her voice trembling. "I don't know you, don't touch me." Alexander darkened his gaze, tightened his grip, and flung Camille onto the bed. Camille winced as the wound on her back was aggravated, her face instantly paling from the pain. Immediately after, Alexander pressed closer, pulling open the collar of her nightgown to caress her delicate skin. Camille ignored the pain and desperately tried to stop Alexander's advances. Alexander's eyes slightly reddened, impatiently grabbed Camille's wrists and pinned them above her head. Camille blacked out from the pain, no longer having the strength to resist. Soon, faint whimpers and heavy panting filled the bedroom. The next day, Auntie Emily let out an involuntary scream upon seeing the scene in the bedroom. There lay Camille on the bed, breathing weakly, a pool of blood beneath her. Auntie Emily hurried to call the family doctor. 2 hours later, Camille finally regained consciousness, and the reopened wound on her back was redressed. She turned her head and saw Auntie Emily, instantly tearing up. "Auntie Emily, I want to go home. Auntie Emily also felt a lump in her throat upon hearing this and comforted her. Don't be afraid, miss. We'll be home soon. Camille closed her eyes in sorrow, a single tear sliding down her cheek. In the afternoon, Catherine arrived at the villa's entrance. The servant hesitated awkwardly before saying, Madam. The master said you're not allowed to enter. Catherine clenched her fists, forcing a smile. I just forgot something and came back to get it. With that, she brushed past the servant's attempts to stop her and headed straight for the bedroom. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Camille lying weakly on the bed. Camille finally showed a smile upon seeing Catherine. Catherine raised an eyebrow in surprise at Camille's reaction. Could it be that Camille has truly lost her memory? Catherine quickly devised a plan, squeezing out a few tears as she rushed to Camille's bedside. Camille, I finally found you. Alexander, that beast, did such things to the Burton family. And now he's even imprisoned you. Sure enough, Camille asked nervously, what's wrong with my family? Auntie Emily quickly intervened, saying, Miss. Catherine secretly curled her lips, feigning sorrow as she said, Uncle and the others. They were Alexander killed. Upon hearing these words, Camille felt the world spin before her eyes. How could it be? How could her family possibly be dead? Auntie Emily made a gesture as if to Catherine drive her out. You ungrateful wretch, get out of here now. Camille finally managed to recover. Seeing Auntie Emily react so intensely, she couldn't believe it. Auntie Emily, you knew about it too. Auntie Emily paused her hand and remained silent. Catherine seized the opportunity to step forward and grab Camille's hand, tears streaming down her face. This is Alexander's place. Everyone here was sent by Alexander to keep an eye on you. Don't you understand? Camille gradually clenched her fist, looking at Catherine with difficulty as she asked, Where are my parents now? Catherine quickly said, I'll take you there right now. Ignoring Auntie Emily and the servants' attempts to stop her, Catherine led Camille out of the villa. Which made Camille believe Catherine's words a little more. Suburban woods. Camille looked around and asked in confusion, Catherine, why did you bring me here? Catherine led Camille under a tree, her tone heavy with emotion. It was here that Uncle's ashes were scattered by Alexander. Camille froze, murmuring instinctively, What? Her pupils contracted sharply as she stared fixedly at the snowdrift before her, her body suddenly losing all strength as she collapsed to the ground. As the snow was brushed aside, Camille soon felt a powdery substance beneath her fingers, her heart sinking deeper into despair. Catherine watched from the side, feeling utterly satisfied. Never did she expect to witness Camille in such an unsightly state, and the anger in her heart subsided somewhat. Soon, she put on that sorrowful expression again and said, Don't you remember, back then, Alexander made you kowtow before he would agree to help bury your uncle and the others. But he turned out to be a fraud. He never kept his promise. He scattered all their ashes. Camille felt that Catherine's voice was now a distant blur, and the next second everything went black as she fainted straight away, opening her eyes again. Camille found herself back in the Carter family's bedroom. Awake, she turned towards the voice. It was Alexander. Alexander reached out to touch Camille's forehead. Camille's pupils suddenly constricted as she instinctively recoiled from him. Don't touch me. Camille huddled in a corner of the bed clutching the blanket, tears continuously streaming from her eyes. Alexander's hand froze mid-air. He felt extremely agitated inside, but seeing Camille's fearful expression, he still walked out. Where is the family doctor? Go in and treat her. Alexander scanned the room, and the doctor quickly entered with a medical kit. Half an hour later, the doctor stepped out of the room and was met by Alexander. Alexander asked in a low voice, How is she? Hearing this, the doctor answered honestly, Currently, there's a fever, and the wound on the back has reopened many times. If not careful, it's highly likely to get infected. Additionally, the private area is very red and swollen, already inflamed. Such activities must not continue. Alexander pursed his thin lips and remained silent. Camille's current physical condition is very poor, all because of him. Alexander suddenly snapped back to reality. Why should he feel guilty about Camille? This is all what the Burton family owes him. They deserve it. He entered the room again. Meeting Camille's eyes filled with resentment, he instinctively asked, Do you remember now? However, Camille only gritted her teeth and said, Why did you target the Burton family, and my family, my parents? Alexander, hearing this, let out an almost imperceptible sigh of relief. He scoffed, So what, you can't escape now? With that, he turned and left the bedroom. Meeting Assistant Buck's gaze, Alexander's voice turned colder. Keep an eye on Camille, there won't be a next time. Assistant Buck quickly agreed, then cautiously asked, how should we arrange Camille's schedule afterward? Alexander darkened his gaze, the corners of his lips curling slightly. What's wrong with keeping her locked up for a lifetime? Assistant Buck was inwardly startled, never expecting Alexander to be so fixated on Camille. He needed to find time to inform Mr. Devon. Meanwhile, inside the bedroom, Camille stared fixedly at the tightly shut door, her eyes filled with resentment. The next second, she clutched her head in agony as pain and fragmented memories invaded her mind. The pain left her voiceless, collapsing onto the bed drenched in cold sweat. At this moment Auntie Emily was instructed to take care of Camille. Upon entering, she saw Camille curled up on the bed, half dead. Miss, when Camille woke up again, it was already dark outside. Camille opened her eyes to meet Auntie Emily's worried gaze, recalling Catherine's words from earlier. Camille's expression toward Auntie Emily cooled noticeably. Faced with this, Auntie Emily couldn't suppress the bitterness in her heart. Miss, it's not that I won't tell you. I've watched you grow up. How could I bear to make you grieve all over again? Hearing this, Camille was deeply moved. She held Auntie Emily's hand and pleaded, Auntie Emily, I want to know the truth now. Are my parents and brother really dead? Auntie Emily couldn't bear to look and closed her eyes, nodding silently. Camille was as if struck by lightning, collapsing weakly against the headboard in tears. Auntie Emily gritted her teeth in hatred and said, Miss, you've forgotten now. Alexander was once your fiancé. On the very day of your wedding, he reported the Burton family, forcing the master to jump off the building on the spot, and the mistress and young master also committed suicide. Camille shuddered, nearly fainting from tears again. Dad, Mom, brother, Auntie Emily continued, that Catherine is no good either. She and Alexander have been humiliating you all along, miss. At these words, Camille understood everything. In the afternoon, Catherine took advantage of her amnesia, tricking her into going to the woods to relive the pain of losing her family. How cruel. After a long while, Camille's tears had slightly dried on her face. She glanced out the window, then grabbed Auntie Emily's hand and pleaded, Auntie Emily, take me back to the Burton family. Let me take one last look. Auntie Emily understood Camille's feelings. She had also worked for the Burton family for half her life and now deeply resented Alexander and Catherine. But considering Camille's injuries, Auntie Emily shook her head. Miss, your wounds are too severe. You mustn't go out again. Camille now felt the pain from her back wounds throbbing faintly and had no choice but to give up for the time being. In the following days, Alexander and Catherine did not visit the Carter household. Camille had no desire to see those two scheming individuals either, actively cooperating with the family doctor's treatment to recover as soon as possible. Inside the CEO's office, Alexander showed no reaction upon receiving the news. As long as nothing happened. That's fine, there's no need to tell me the rest. Assistant Buck was momentarily puzzled but still responded first. All right, Mr. Alexander. Late that night, inside the bedroom, Camille excitedly grabbed Auntie Emily's hand and whispered, Can we go out today? Auntie Emily nodded, then stepped out to scan the surroundings, making sure no servants were watching at the moment. She helped Camille up, dressed her in a thick coat, and the two quietly slipped out. An hour later, the Burton family's old residence. The Burton family had long been gone, the courtyard outside piled high with snow, looking utterly desolate. Camille's eyes instantly reddened as she staggered inside, seeing everything once familiar now covered in snow. Camille's hatred for Alexander grew even deeper in her heart. Entering the old house, it was pitch black inside. Camille walked upstairs and noticed light seeping through the crack of the study door, without a second thought for Auntie Emily. She hurried over and pushed the door open. A slender figure stood by the desk. The man quickly turned his head at the sound, and his imposing demeanor instantly softened upon seeing Camille. Camille stared at the person before her in disbelief, murmuring, Brother, is it really you, brother? Kevin looked at the frail Camille before him, his eyes instantly reddening. With trembling hands, he pulled Camille into his embrace, his voice choked with tears. Camille. Enveloped in the familiar warmth, Camille finally let her tears fall, clutching Kevin tightly in return. Brother, I thought you were already. On the side, Auntie Emily was also shocked, unable to hide her excitement. Young master, you're all right. Kevin released Camille and explained, It's a long story, why are you all here? Camille told Kevin everything she could still remember. Kevin slammed his fist onto the desk, his eyes filled with rage. Alexander, that bastard. He looked at Camille with heartache. Camille was once the Burton family's most beloved young lady, Who would have thought that in just a few days, Alexander would torture Camille to this state? Kevin suppressed the bitterness in his heart and said, "How much do you remember now? Are you all right? Should we take you to the hospital again?" Auntie Emily tearfully explained, "Young master, you don't know, Alexander imprisoned the young lady as soon as she woke up in the hospital. He took her back to the Carter family and kept her locked in the bedroom." Kevin was so furious his eyes turned red, cursing incessantly, "That bastard, after all our family has done to take care of him and promote him. He turns around and teams up with Devon, that old fox, to bite us back." Camille hated herself for losing her memory, otherwise she could have told her brother more information. She looked up at Kevin, her voice full of concern. "Brother, where are you staying now? What if the police find you and take you away again?" Kevin forced a smile. "Don't worry, I'm safe now, wait for me, I'll definitely take you home." As soon as he finished speaking, the three of them heard a commotion coming from near the old Burton family house. Auntie Emily paled. "Oh no, I'm afraid Alexander's men are coming." Camille was also startled. "Brother, leave quickly, don't let Alexander find you." Kevin frowned as he looked out the window. Around the Burton family's old mansion, a crowd had already gathered. "The situation is urgent, Kevin can't delay any longer." He hugged Camille again to say goodbye. "Camille, wait for me, hold on." Camille nodded, pushing Kevin out of the room and urging, "Go now." A few minutes later, Alexander barged into the house with a group of black-suited bodyguards. As he looked up, his eyes met Camille's. Alexander's face darkened as he scolded, "What are you doing here?" Camille pretended to be frightened and quickly hid behind Auntie Emily, saying, "Auntie Emily, I'm scared." Auntie Emily braved Alexander's murderous glare and explained, "The young lady has been wanting to come home for a visit, so I brought her back." Alexander pursed his thin lips and remained silent. A moment later, he waved his hand, signaling the bodyguards to bring the two down. Camille stood before him, and only then did Alexander feel his long-suspended heart slowly settle. He only then realized he had been worried about Camille, a thought he found unacceptable. This is the daughter of his enemy, how could he possibly fall in love with Camille? A surge of frustration rose in his heart. Alexander grabbed Camille's chin and kissed her fiercely. Camille widened her eyes, instinctively trying to resist, but Alexander for some reason kept biting and gnawing at Camille's soft lips relentlessly, refusing to stop even when he tasted the metallic tang of blood. Camille's eyes welled up with tears, her dark pupils brimming with hatred. Was Alexander deliberately humiliating her? She felt her stomach churning violently, nearly vomiting on the spot. She gritted her teeth and bit down hard with all her might. Ugh! The man's low groan of pain filled Camille with immense satisfaction. She made no attempt to hide the challenge in her eyes, locking gazes directly with Alexander. Surprisingly, Alexander didn't lose his temper. He merely wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth casually before turning to leave. Just as Camille let out a sigh of relief, Alexander suddenly spoke up, "If you like this place so much, then let's burn it down." Chapter 16. As soon as the words fell, Camille screamed at Alexander with eyes wide in fury. "How dare you?" Alexander turned to look at her, his face wearing the familiar malice, identical to that day at the crematorium. "Why wouldn't I dare? This Burton family ancestral home is mine now. I'll burn it if I want." Camille bit her lower lip hard and lunged at him like a madwoman, but the next second, the bodyguard effortlessly subdued Camille, leaving her to glare at him with hatred and scream helplessly. Alexander, satisfied by the scene, led his men back to the Carter family residence. A group of bodyguards had already begun splashing gasoline toward the house. Camille was restrained, powerless to stop them from wreaking havoc on her home. Camille sobbed until her voice nearly failed. "Alexander, I was wrong. Please don't touch the old house, I beg you." Alexander wore a mocking smile, his gentle voice delivering the cruelest words. "Don't you know how to beg me, Miss Camille?" Camille shuddered, recalling countless nights of being forced by Alexander. She glanced at the gasoline nearby, curling her lips. Alexander had intended to burn the house down from the start. Now he just wanted to humiliate her, to trample her. Camille stopped struggling and fell silent, silently watching as the group doused everything with gasoline and lit the fire. The Burton family mansion was engulfed in flames. Alexander looked unexpectedly at Camille, and upon seeing her lifeless face, instinctively furrowed his brows tightly. Immersive translate. In the dead of night, the Carter household was brightly lit. All the servants stood in the living room, waiting uneasily. Alexander sat expressionlessly on the sofa, pulling Camille into an embrace without room for doubt. Alexander spoke coolly. You can't even keep an eye on a patient. Get out. At this, nearly all the servants began pleading with Alexander, begging for another chance. To this, Alexander only sneered, you're pleading to the wrong person. If Ms. Camille is willing to keep you, I'll let it slide. Hearing this, the servants' pleading gazes all fell upon Camille, while Camille clenched her fists. A mocking smile played on her pale lips as she spoke coldly. I don't want to see any of you Carters. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Fine, you can scram now, Miss. Camille doesn't want to see you. Just as expected, the pleading look in their eyes instantly turned to resentment. To this, Camille wore an expression of utter disdain that Alexander would even attempt such tricks now. She got up directly and walked towards the bedroom. Alexander followed closely behind. Camille no longer resisted this time, calmly pulling up the covers to prepare for sleep. A few seconds later, she felt the bed dip slightly beside her, followed by a pair of hands encircling her waist, gently caressing. The meaning was clear to everyone. Camille turned her back to Alexander, her face filled with disgust. Alexander, if you dare lay a hand on me today, I'll kill myself immediately. The hand on her waist paused. Alexander gritted his teeth and said, Are you threatening me? Camille sneered, You've already destroyed my entire family. I might as well die too. Alexander hadn't expected Camille to become even more resolute after losing her memory. Was it because those 3 years of emotions were gone that she could hate him without restraint? At this thought, Alexander felt a pang in his heart. An indescribable discomfort. He stopped moving, only tightening his arms to pull Camille into his embrace. The next day, Camille woke up to find the space beside her empty. She smiled self-deprecatingly and got up to enter the bathroom. In the mirror, she could still see the marks Alexander had left on her. She rubbed the skin vigorously with an expressionless face, scrubbing until a patch of skin broke and faint traces of blood appeared. Outside the bathroom, Auntie Emily called out, Miss, Devon is here and wants to see you. Camille paused, her tone turning colder. Devon, she knew this person, her father's close friend and right-hand man in the company. He was also Catherine's father. After learning that Catherine's family had conspired with Alexander to kill the Burton family, Camille also developed a deep loathing for the Sue family. This ungrateful wretch who bites the hand that feeds her will surely get her comeuppance sooner or later. Half an hour later, Camille came downstairs wearing loose clothes. In an instant, her gaze met a pair of narrow, shadowy eyes. Devon stood up first, a smile on his face. You don't look well, miss. Are you still feeling unwell? Camille glared coldly at his act and directly exposed it. No need to put on a show in front of me. I know what you and Alexander have done. Devon paused mid-sentence, his smile fading. In that case, I, Sue, shall speak frankly and without reserve, Camille retorted bluntly. At this point, what more is there for us to say? Seeing Camille being so uncooperative, Devon completely lost his patience. Devon glared venomously at Camille and said, Camille, you know the Burton family is already finished. Do you really insist on staying here as a mistress rather than leaving? Must you be such an eyesore? Camille was well aware that Devon was venting his anger on behalf of Catherine. She crossed her arms, her expression full of mockery. If you want to avenge Catherine, does Alexander know about it? Devon froze for a moment. Clearly he had come to make trouble behind Alexander's back. Camille frowned slightly. Devon was a veteran of the JK group, and this time he wouldn't have come behind Alexander's back just to deliver a single threat. She took a sip of water and spoke slowly. You also brought the share transfer agreement, didn't you? Devon didn't expect this Burton family young lady, who previously seemed naive, now appeared to know everything. His mind raced with thoughts, growing increasingly convinced that he needed to eliminate Camille. The Burton family is now a ticking time bomb, especially since this sudden power grab has left many in the group dissatisfied with them. To expect Camille to help them quell the internal turmoil in the company is absolutely impossible. The only option is to completely kick Camille out of JK. Devon had a grim expression and hadn't even spoken when Camille cut him off. My shares mean nothing to Alexander. The only reason he came to me is that the old-timers under Dad aren't happy with your management. By now, Devon's face had turned the color of liver. In normal circumstances, whether it was negotiating deals or holding meetings, he was always the one in control. Now I'm actually being overshadowed by a little girl, Devon said coldly. Right now, apart from those few shares, you have no means to contend with us. I'm offering you a way out. Just hand over the shares to me. I'll buy them from you at market price and arrange for you to leave the country. Camille couldn't help but think Devon was truly a cunning old fox. had she not known her brother was still alive. She might have actually agreed to these terms to get away from Alexander. Camille suddenly picked up a water glass and splashed it in Devon's face. You pushed my Burton family into the fire, and you still expect me to make a deal with you? Devon, you're dreaming. As long as I'm here, don't even think about pocketing JK for yourself. Devon was completely enraged and raised his hand to slap Camille hard across the face. The slap was so forceful that it split the corner of her mouth, leaving a streak of blood. Devon glared with a vicious light in his eyes. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for showing no mercy. As he spoke, Devon raised his hand again, ready to strike. Suddenly, the villa door swung open, and Alexander appeared in the doorway. His face darkened as he growled, "Stop." Alexander had barely stepped through the door when he saw Camille about to be struck. Moving closer, he noticed Camille's face was already badly swollen on one side. Instinctively, his voice carried a hint of anger as he asked, "Godfather, what are you doing here?" Alexander's gaze fell once more on the clear slap mark on Camille's cheek, his tone ambiguous. "You even hit someone under my protection." Devon showed no guilt for being exposed. Instead, he shamelessly turned the tables. "You've been hiding this woman all along. Don't you know what situation the company is in?" Alexander frowned slightly, his expression darkening. "My affairs don't require your interference, Godfather." Devon was instantly infuriated by his protective stance toward Camille. How dare you hide Camille? What about my daughter?" Alexander grew even more somber at these words. "She's already the CEO's wife, isn't that enough?" Devon was momentarily speechless. Initially, they had agreed that Catherine would marry Alexander, and Alexander hadn't broken that promise. Who would have thought Alexander wasn't just a fool hellbent on revenge? Ever since he helped Alexander take over JK Group, Alexander seized power at an unexpected speed, leaving him no chance at all. Camille stood between the two, maintaining a posture of covering her face the entire time, her dark hair slightly draped down, covering her petite face as silent teardrops fell unnoticed. Alexander felt his heart suddenly tighten at the sight, without a second thought. By the time he came to his senses, Camille was already tightly embraced in his arms. Camille was momentarily stunned as she found herself buried in an embrace that carried a hint of chill. She instinctively tried to break free, but was tightly restrained by Alexander's iron-like arms. She froze momentarily, then a look of disgust surfaced between her brows. Alexander was now holding her in front of Devon. Wasn't this just using her as a shield while pretending to show how much he cared for her? The mere thought of this man colluding with the female antagonist made her nauseous to the point of vomiting. But this is also an opportunity. Alexander is now lost in his own delusions, thinking that just because she lost her memory, they can start over. In his dreams, overwhelming hatred reddens Camille's eyes. Since Alexander can use her, why can't she use Alexander? Clearly, Alexander now harbored feelings for Camille that even he himself hadn't realized. Camille thought of this, a mocking curve forming at the corner of her lips. Alexander and Devon's argument ended quickly, with Devon storming off in anger. Alexander glanced at Camille's face and ordered a servant to bring a bag of ice. Watching him apply the ice with an expressionless face, Camille slowly lowered her eyes. Alexander said quietly, "If he comes again in the future, don't see him." Camille said with a trembling voice, "I know you want my shares, I'll give them to you, just let me go." Alexander suddenly tightened his grip, causing the bag of ice to burst, scattering cubes all over the floor between them. With a dark expression, he grabbed Camille's hand and forcefully pulled her closer. "Camille," he said, "I told you, you're not leaving my sight. Run somewhere, and I'll burn it down." Camille shuddered, putting on an appearance of reluctant submission. Alexander was pleased and pulled her into the bedroom for another round. By the time Camille woke again, it was already dark outside. As soon as she stepped out to find something to eat, a young servant came walking toward her. Before she could react, a note was shoved into her hand. Camille quickly came to her senses and immediately returned to her room to read the note. Meeting in the courtyard, Camille walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and indeed spotted a figure hidden behind a tree. She draped a coat over herself and prepared to step outside. Sure enough, two servants were guarding the entrance. Alexander had stationed them there to prevent her from escaping. Auntie Emily was holding a cup of warm milk when she saw Camille and hurriedly asked with concern, "Miss, you've been asleep all day. Are you hungry? Let me make you something to eat." Camille stopped her, saying, "I'd like to take a walk in the garden." Auntie Emily put down the milk and said, "I'll accompany you, miss." Camille lowered her eyes and chose to Auntie Emily keep it from her. I'll be fine alone. I just want to clear my mind. Auntie Emily, seeing her distraught appearance, she recalled what Alexander had done to Camille during the day and began to understand a little. Miss, please come back early and don't catch a cold. In the courtyard, Camille returned to the tree from earlier, only to realize when the figure materialized that it wasn't Kevin. The man wore a beige trench coat that accentuated his tall, slender frame. His high-bridged nose supported a pair of frameless glasses, giving him an overall scholarly appearance. Camille eyed the man warily. Who are you? Frank let out a light chuckle, instantly dispelling his usual scholarly aloofness. Your brother's been tied up lately, so he asked me to check on things. Camille felt slightly relieved upon hearing this and pressed further. How is my brother? Some time ago, the Burton family's house was burned down. With so little time in between, she was worried whether Kevin had managed to leave in time. Frank shook his head slightly. Don't worry, your brother is just fine. Camille looked up at the rather handsome man before her. Are you my brother's friend? I haven't seen you before. Upon hearing this, Frank's eyes dimmed for a moment before filling with a smile again. Didn't you lose your memory? How could you possibly remember me now? At these words, Camille confirmed this was someone she knew 3 years ago and stopped dwelling on it. Under the dim light falling on both of them, Frank finally noticed Camille's conspicuous, ambiguous marks on her neck. His pupils slightly contracted, and his voice grew urgent. Alexander laid hands on you. Camille held her breath. She didn't want others to know she was still with Alexander. Whether forced or not, it made her utterly ashamed. Frank saw Camille's already pale face grow even paler. Feeling as if thousands of needles were piercing his heart, without thinking, he reached out and pulled Camille into his arms. This isn't your fault. A faint, delicate fragrance lingered around him, and Camille instinctively felt her eyes well up with tears. She tugged at the collar of her trench coat, burying herself deeper into it. Frank felt a slight dampness on his chest, leaving a bitter taste in his heart. It wasn't that he hadn't considered taking Camille away, but his family strongly opposed it, even freezing his bank cards. All he could do was lend Kevin a hand to help rescue Camille. After what felt like an eternity, the voice of Auntie Emily called from outside. Camille reluctantly pulled herself away from Frank's embrace. She glanced at the damp spot on the man's chest, her face flushing with embarrassment. Looking up to meet his gaze, she said softly, though I don't remember you, your embrace gives me a sense of comfort. Thank you. Frank froze in surprise. Auntie Emily's voice grew closer. Camille knew it was time to leave. Before leaving, she turned back to Frank and said, Tell my brother I'm doing well and not to worry. A long-lost smile appeared on the girl's face, transforming the silvery white ground into the warmth of early spring, bringing a gentle warmth to her heart. Frank watched Camille's departing figure with a resolute expression. I will definitely take you away, definitely. The next day, Camille had a fever. The family doctor diagnosed it as a cold. Alexander scolded the servant upon hearing this and summoned Auntie Emily to the study. Camille watched as Alexander's men took Auntie Emily away, her heart skipping a beat. What are you trying to do? Camille tried to hold on to Auntie Emily, terrified that Alexander might harm Auntie Emily right now. Apart from the brother who couldn't appear, Auntie Emily was now her only remaining family. Auntie Emily looked touched and said, Don't worry about me, miss, I'll be fine. Auntie Emily's assistant Buck also smiled reassuringly. And Mrs. Camille, don't worry. The master just wants to ask some questions. Camille slowly released her grip, her expression icy. If Alexander dares to lay a hand on my people, he can prepare to see my corpse. In the study, as soon as she entered the study, Auntie Emily's timid expression instantly vanished, replaced by one of reverence. Sir, Alexander sat at the desk, his expression inscrutable. Did she go out yesterday? Auntie Emily slightly leaned forward and replied, Yes, sir. The young lady woke up at night and went to the courtyard. Alexander raised an eyebrow, fiddling with the custom pen in his hand. Alone. Auntie Emily, beads of cold sweat appeared on her forehead. The young lady said she wanted to be alone to clear her mind, so I didn't follow her. Alexander remained silent for a long time. So long that Auntie Emily felt disaster was imminent in the next second. Alexander said coldly, You may leave. Hearing this, Auntie Emily felt as if granted a royal pardon and quickly exited the study. Alexander stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the servants below clearing the snow from the courtyard. He thought of the Burton family's eldest son, Kevin. At first, he also believed the Burton family members, except for Camille, were all dead. Little did he expect Kevin to pull off a vanishing act right under his nose. If it weren't for Auntie Emily contacting him that night, he truly wouldn't have known. Last night, Camille must have gone to see Kevin, otherwise she wouldn't have stayed alone in the courtyard for so long. Alexander's eyes darkened slightly. It seemed he needed to thoroughly investigate Kevin's south hiding place inside the bedroom. Camille looked at the sweaty, pale-faced Auntie Emily and immediately stood up, asking, "Auntie Emily, what's wrong? Did Alexander do something to you?" Auntie Emily turned her head to look at Camille, her expression somewhat complicated. Initially, she had no intention of betraying Camille, but the Burton family was already in decline, and most of the old servants of the Burton family had disappeared from City X due to Alexander's schemes. Camille was also under Alexander's control. Like a canary trapped in a cage, Auntie Emily didn't want her family to be innocently implicated anyway. Camille isn't in any life-threatening danger, and mere surveillance won't lead to any trouble. Auntie Emily snapped back to reality, composed herself, and said, "It's all right, miss, I still need to take care of you. Alexander won't do anything to me." Camille finally let out a sigh of relief upon hearing this. Auntie Emily pretended to help Camille back to bed. "Miss, you should get some more sleep." Before the words had fully left his mouth, hurried footsteps sounded outside the door. The footsteps passed by Camille's bedroom, heading swiftly toward the study. Assistant Buck walked into the study with an anxious expression, his tablet displaying City X's latest news. Silent upheaval. The largest local conglomerate, JK Group, suddenly changes hands. While the Burton family vanishes without a trace amid unexpected turmoil, Alexander also saw the news, his face turning grim. They had known from the start that this matter couldn't be brought to light, which was why they had suppressed the news to prevent any leaks. "I can't believe someone actually sold the information to the media now." Alexander slammed the tablet onto the desk, his tone icy. "Investigate, find out who the mole in this company is." Soon Camille also saw the news on her phone and couldn't help but feel shocked. This news is very suspicious. Back then, when the Burton family faced disaster, these media outlets didn't make such a fuss. Now that the company's board has changed, they're making a huge spectacle. Before she could think further, the bedroom door suddenly opened from the outside, interrupting her thoughts. Alexander looked at Camille with a dark expression. "Change your clothes and come with me." Hearing this, Auntie Emily immediately prepared clothes for Camille, a move that made Camille frown instinctively. Alexander dragging her away to clarify things is normal. But why would Auntie Emily, who always sides with her, listen so obediently to Alexander? Auntie Emily brought her a Chanel-style suit set, which looked slightly loose on Camille. Auntie Emily said with heartache in her eyes, "You've lost weight again, miss." Camille lowered her eyes and replied in a flat tone, "It's fine." Alexander stood at the bedroom door, taking in everything with his eyes, his hand involuntarily tightening. What's wrong with him now? Why does he feel a tightness in his chest every time he sees Camille? An hour later, at the JK Group press conference, in the lounge, Alexander looked at the expressionless Camille and whispered, "You don't need to speak later, just sit there quietly." Camille turned her head to look at him, her gaze defiant. "I may have amnesia, but I'm not stupid. Why should I help you?" Alexander let out a cold laugh. "If you won't go on stage, I'll drag you up there myself." The tension between the two instantly became palpable. The lights for the press conference had already turned on, and the clamor of media outside grew increasingly chaotic. Alexander glared at her fiercely, gritting his teeth. "If you don't attend, prepare to watch JK Group's stocks plummet. By then, the last remnants of your Burton family will be gone." Camille fumed. "You?" Alexander chuckled softly in disdain, adjusted his bow tie, and turned to walk toward the press conference. Camille had no choice but to follow. The two appeared at the press conference one after another, with the media's barrage of cameras clicking incessantly at them. The barrage of media questions followed one after another. "Mr. Alexander, is it true that you betrayed the old Mr. Burton out of ingratitude to inherit the company, as rumored?" "Mrs. Camille, what are your thoughts on the initial sentencing of the Burton family? Rumors say that the Burton family now only has Ms. Camille left. Why did you choose to remain silent instead of fighting for power with your shares?" Camille sat there unheard by the entire party. Just as Alexander said, being a mere vase would suffice. Alexander held the microphone, looking completely at ease. "JK Group was the brainchild of old Burton. I earned his appreciation, and after he stepped down, he personally told the other board members to appoint me as the president. As for the malicious speculation from the outside, I hereby declare that it's all rumors. Camille listened quietly as Alexander spoke eloquently, a hint of mockery in her smile. Soon, the press conference was drawing to a close. Alexander deflected each of the reporters' questions one by one. Camille looked at the microphone in front of her and suddenly reached out to pick it up. Everyone. The media saw Camille suddenly speak up, and the cameras quickly focused on Camille. Camille had a fleeting glimmer of tears in her eyes as she said firmly, "As Benjamin's daughter, I must say one thing." The next second, Camille's microphone instantly lost sound. Alexander's face also turned frighteningly dark, but Camille ignored them completely and emphasized to the media, "Alexander is a fraud. He deceived the Burton family, deceived everyone, colluded with others, and is unworthy of being JK Group's president." As soon as these words were spoken, the entire room erupted in an instant uproar. The reporters' eyes lit up with excitement as they bombarded Camille with questions. Alexander grabbed Camille's hand forcefully and turned to drag Camille off the stage. After only a few steps, Camille suddenly collapsed to the ground, unconscious. This scene was captured by the vast majority of reporters present. With the sounds of shutters and flashes filling the press conference, Alexander changed his expression upon seeing Camille's pale face. He quickly picked her up and left the press conference. Inside a private hospital, Camille lay unconscious on the hospital bed. Alexander, currently seething with pent-up anger, suppressed his rage and asked the doctor, "What's her condition?" The doctor, looking at the test results in hand, replied, "She has a fever, low blood sugar, and some anemia. Her physical condition is very poor. It's best for her to stay in the hospital for a few days to recuperate before being discharged." Alexander pressed his thin lips together, glanced at Camille, then turned and left the ward. After taking just 2 steps, Catherine suddenly appeared and threw herself onto Alexander. She widened her eyes and stared at Alexander, her tone dripping with disgust. "I told you we should have dealt with Camille, Alexander. Now the internet is flooded with news and comments condemning you. You never should have kept her." Alexander instinctively furrowed his brows and pushed Catherine's hand away. "Let PR handle this. Is there anything else?" Unexpectedly, Alexander's reaction was so indifferent. Catherine had a momentary look of surprise on her face. Soon her expression twisted again. "Alexander, how can you protect the daughter of the enemy who destroyed your entire family?" At the mention of the Burton family and his own vendetta, Alexander grew visibly agitated, growing increasingly impatient with Catherine, who kept making noise non-stop. He instructed the bodyguard, "Guard the ward and don't let anyone else in." "Okay, Mr. Alexander." With that, Alexander strode away, leaving Catherine looking resentful. Catherine stared fixedly at Camille in the room. Why is it that even now Alexander still sides with Camille? But her family already helped Alexander get revenge. Why? JK Group, CEO's office. Alexander looked around at the circle of company executives, his brows furrowed with lingering anger. "After all this time, you still can't find anyone. Is the company keeping you all just to feed you for nothing?" At these words, everyone appeared trembling with fear, except for Devon. The office was completely silent, yet he stood before the crowd, boldly locking eyes with Alexander. "Mr. Alexander, you can't say that. We're all long-time employees of the company. No matter what, you shouldn't take your anger out on us, instead of investigating our own people. Mr. Alexander, perhaps you should check if there are any loose ends in your own house." Devon's words were subtle, uniting all the executives here in the same camp while quietly shifting the blame onto Camille. Alexander narrowed his eyes and stared at Devon. Having always known he was a cunning fox, never expected to find himself stepping into his trap here. Only the board members and these company executives knew the inside story. The leak must have come from among them. The board has always treated stock prices as their lifeline. They wouldn't shoot themselves in the foot. Soon, Alexander thought of intercepting him at the hospital, targeting Camille to provoke Catherine. He realized this was Devon's way of putting him in his place. With a cold laugh, he spoke bluntly to Devon, his voice icy. "Seems I underestimated you. To secure this position, you're already making your move against me so soon. If you dare threaten me with these matters again, I'll make Camille the group president." The president's office was as silent as a graveyard. Everyone stared at Alexander in disbelief, wondering if their ears were playing tricks on them. Devon turned crimson with rage, pointing at Alexander and thundering, "You!" Quickly regaining his composure, he sneered, "Camille's shares are pitifully small. What can she possibly do in the company besides being a shareholder?" Alexander raised an eyebrow at him. "You think the shares aren't enough? What if you add mine? Would that be sufficient? Devon was thunderstruck, too furious to even speak. Seeing Alexander's expression that showed no pretense, his anger flared even hotter. Alexander, no matter how Devon was annoyed, got up and walked straight through the crowd to leave, completely disregarding Devon's dignity. Meanwhile, inside the private hospital, Catherine had been stopped by the bodyguards for over 10 minutes. Her voice was sharp as she pointed at the two bodyguards and said, "I am Mr. Alexander's wife, can't I even order you around?" The bodyguard replied expressionlessly, "Sorry, ma'am, we only take orders from Mr. Alexander." Catherine was about to lose her temper, but as she thought of her father's arrangements, her anger gradually subsided. After all, her father would soon gain a say in the company. And then she could enter this hospital room whenever she wanted. With that thought, she gave a cold laugh toward the hospital room and turned to leave. Soon, Camille also gradually regained consciousness. She frowned, looking around to confirm she was in the hospital. She only remembered that at the end of the press conference, she had spoken ill of Alexander, was dragged away by Alexander, and then fainted. Camille flipped through her memories, and upon careful consideration, she finally realized something was amiss. The reporters' questions were all very sharp, but their content diverged from the direction of the initial report. It felt like standing from the perspective of the Burton family victims to criticize Alexander. Camille lit up with recognition. This had to be either her brother's handiwork or Frank's. The court of public opinion was only a temporary setback. Alexander still stood unshaken with nearly half the shares in his grasp. Bang! A loud slamming door interrupted Camille's train of thought. She looked up and locked eyes with Alexander, his dark gaze meeting hers. Camille showed not a trace of guilt on her face. Instead, she gradually smiled. Did our Mr. Alexander suppress those news reports? Alexander grabbed Camille by the neck and said sharply, "I underestimated you. After a few days of quiet, you take a bite out of me." As he spoke, Alexander's hand gripping Camille tightened continuously. Camille felt the air in her chest growing thinner, a faint stinging pain already creeping into her lungs. She struggled to speak. "What? Now that you know I stand in the way of your ambitions, you've finally decided to kill me too?" Alexander paused, a fleeting look of shock crossing his face. Camille's gaze was icy, yet Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that there was a hint of sorrow within it. Was it because he laid hands on her? Alexander gradually loosened his grip. Staring blankly at Camille had tears in her eyes, clutching her fragile throat as if she was about to cough her lungs out. For a moment, she thought she was going to die. On the verge of death, she recalled fragmented memories, and those of Alexander. After finally catching her breath, she looked up at Alexander and asked, "We were once together, weren't we?" Alexander stiffened, his tone involuntarily sharpening. "You remember." Camille observed this and sneered inwardly. Her face showed an expression of disbelief and devastation. "No, it can't be. Why would I fall in love with you?" Alexander couldn't even stay angry at the sight and stepped forward to embrace her. Camille, calm down." Camille covered her head and let out a sudden, piercing scream. No, this is all fake." Camille's outburst was utterly sudden. Alexander had no choice but to hold her in his panic. While restraining the struggling Camille, he shouted outside, "Get a doctor." The assistant Buck also snapped back to reality and immediately went to fetch a doctor. Alexander soothed gently, "It's all fake, don't think about it, I'm here." "Camille, look at me." Camille, the pain on her face eased slightly. She looked at Alexander with confusion, choking back a sob. Alexander showed a hint of joy on his face. "It's me." "Camille, you're tired, go to sleep." Camille obediently lay back on the hospital bed, her eyes icy cold in the place where Alexander couldn't see. She just found it ridiculous. Alexander claimed to seek revenge against the Burton family, yet couldn't help falling for her. Seeing his gentle expression, Camille found it eerily familiar. Perhaps he had often used that very look to deceive her during those 3 years. The doctor arrived quickly and, as a precaution, administered Camille a sedative. Alexander didn't let go of her, turning his head to look at the doctor. "What's wrong with her?" The doctor then noticed Camille's neck bruises and, masking his expression, explained, "Lack of oxygen can damage the brain. Based on the patient's condition, it's highly likely that something triggered her memory, causing the headache." Alexander pursed his lips, a flicker of guilt flashing through his eyes. Camille had seemed as fragile as glass just moments ago, as if she would shatter at the slightest touch, but the way she clung to his clothes made it seem as though she saw him as her only lifeline. Alexander couldn't help but curl the corners of his lips. He quite liked this feeling. Now the Burton family has only Kevin, that sewer rat, a Camille. He could easily lock her away and make her his exclusive possession. Thinking this, Alexander quickly made up his mind. He would imprison Camille. He would make her alone, turning her into a woman who could only rely on him. The ward was eerily quiet. Alexander held Camille tightly, a trace of madness flickering between his brows. Everything that happened in the ward was witnessed by Catherine, who was hiding around the corner. She stared at Alexander with an expressionless face, her eyes gleaming with cold light. In that case, Alexander couldn't be left alive either. Then let's send this pair off together. Catherine turned and left. While inside the hospital room, Alexander remained completely unaware. Immersive translate. Meanwhile, in the family study, the expressions of the two men in the study were grave, especially Frank. He couldn't help but turn to Kevin and frown, saying, "Are you sure about leaving Camille alone at the hospital? Didn't you see the state she's in?" Kevin also recalled the video and medical records the doctor had given him earlier, nearly rushing out in anger. "No, if I fail this time, Camille will truly be beyond saving." Frank clenched his fists in frustration, saying hoarsely, "Then what should we do? Camille's current condition, staying with Alexander any longer will only lead to disaster." Kevin shook his head. "Haven't you noticed that Alexander's men have been searching for information about me lately? It's highly likely he already knows I'm not dead." Frank frowned, his expression extremely grim. "That shouldn't be the case. Except for that time you met Camille at Burton's house." Kevin pursed his lips tightly, his tone grave. "I'm afraid Auntie Emily by Camille's side is already Alexander's person." Frank held his breath. Now Camille was truly venturing alone into the dragon's den, isolated and without support. After struggling for a long time, Kevin took a deep breath and said, "In that case, let's take the person out and make sure Alexander can't find them." Kevin didn't say this on impulse. He calculated the chips in his hand. Though he couldn't go head-to-head with Alexander, it was enough. Frank immediately pressed further upon hearing this. "Are you sure?" Kevin pondered and said, "First, we need to see if Alexander will take Camille away. The hospital is the safest place to take her." Frank replied without hesitation, "I'll go to the hospital to see her." Immersive translate. City X private hospital. Inside the ward, Camille finally awoke from her deep slumber. As she opened her eyes, she saw Auntie Emily and instinctively smiled faintly, saying, "Auntie Emily, how long have you been here?" Auntie Emily looked worried and said, "I just arrived, miss. Sleeping this much every day will harm your health. Have something to eat quickly." As she spoke, Auntie Emily handed the warm porridge to Camille. Camille felt the warmth in her hands and smiled sincerely at Auntie Emily, saying, "I'll take care of myself," as she sipped her porridge. Auntie Emily said beside her, "Young miss, there's still no news from the young master. For now, it's best not to confront the master directly, or you'll be the one getting hurt." Camille paused for a moment, then whispered, "Auntie Emily, let's not bring up my brother's matter again." She glanced at the two bodyguards standing at the door, her expression slightly cold. Auntie Emily also realized she had spoken out of turn and quickly covered her mouth, falling silent. After a moment, Auntie Emily tentatively spoke up, "Miss, I overheard the master arguing with Catherine earlier. Catherine wanted to take action against you, but the master absolutely refused and even posted 2 bodyguards to prevent Catherine from entering." Camille composed her expression and sneered, "The only reason he protects me is for his JK group. If something happened to me, there'd be no one left to suppress the public opinion surrounding the group." Auntie Emily felt a lump in her throat upon hearing this but said nothing more. At this moment, the voices of 2 bodyguards came from the doorway. "Mr. Alexander." Camille looked up, meeting Alexander's deep gaze. Camille said coldly, "What are you doing here? Come to strangle me again?" Alexander remained expressionless, walking straight toward Camille. "Get out." Auntie Emily turned pale but obediently got up and left the ward, as the sound of the ward door closing echoed. A fiery kiss sealed Camille's lips. Camille was so startled that her hand trembled, spilling the porridge onto the quilt, but Alexander didn't care at all, even reaching out to press Camille's head further to deepen the kiss. Camille stared coldly at the man, his expression blatantly showing he was thoroughly enjoying the kiss. It was utterly disgusting. Camille opened her mouth and fiercely bit Alexander's lip, instantly filling both their mouths with the metallic taste of blood. Their tongues tangled for a long moment before they finally broke apart, both panting heavily. Camille's first reaction was to raise her hand and slap Alexander hard across the face. "What the hell are you doing?" Alexander's face was struck to the side. But instead of getting angry, he smiled, turning his head to stare fixedly at Camille. "Camille, wouldn't it be nice to stay by my side forever?" Camille keenly sensed something unusual in his behavior and tried to move her body away from him. "Alexander, you were willing to spend so much time avenging your family's death. Now that my family has been killed because of you, why should I stay with you?" Alexander clearly wasn't listening. "The only reason you still dare to oppose me now is because of Kevin, isn't it?" Camille stiffened, unable to believe that Alexander actually knew about her brother's existence. As if pleased with Alexander's reaction, Alexander leaned down and encircled Alexander. "I suggest you don't hold any expectations for Kevin. He'll soon be truly dead." Alexander's pupils constricted abruptly, gripping the sheets beneath him tightly. Unable to speak, Alexander whispered seductively by her ear, "Stop struggling pointlessly. Be my missus." Camille snapped back to reality, pushing Alexander away with gritted teeth, saying, "I'd rather die than let you have your way." Alexander was infuriated by Camille's attitude and sneered, "Fine, when I drag Kevin before you, let's see if you still have the nerve." With that, Alexander stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Camille seemed to have all her strength drained in an instant as she leaned wearily against the headboard. "What should I do? Brother has been discovered. With our parents' bodies not yet cold in their graves, she continues to submit herself beneath our enemy. Sometimes she truly wishes she could just die and be done with it." Soon, there was movement at the ward door. Camille turned towards the voice and saw a familiar figure approaching her quickly. "Camille." Her eyes widened slightly as she recognized the person. As if remembering something, she stood up to shoo them away. "Go quickly, go tell my brother. Alexander has already found him. Hurry." Camille reacted intensely, and Frank's face was filled with heartache at the sight. He embraced Camille and gently reassured her. "Don't be afraid, your brother is fine. I'm here today to take you away." Camille suddenly looked up at him, her face wet with tears. Really, even in such dire circumstances, Camille couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope at Frank's words. What if she wouldn't miss any chance to escape from Alexander? Frank draped his coat over Camille and led her out of the ward by hand. "I've diverted Alexander's men, let's go." Camille tightly gripped Frank's hand, her heart rate skyrocketing. All she could hear was the deafening sound of her own heartbeat. Just as the two were about to run out of the hospital lobby, the dimly lit space suddenly became as bright as daylight. A group of black-clad bodyguards immediately swarmed out. Surrounding them, Alexander stepped out of the crowd unhurriedly, his expression slightly dark. "How impressive. I knew it couldn't just be Kevin alone who kept evading us. Turns out there was an accomplice." Frank warily shielded Camille behind him, blocking Alexander's predatory gaze. Alexander's expression darkened further, his tone dropping lower. "I knew it. How could I have forgotten about you?" As if struck by a thought, he suddenly sneered coldly. "She doesn't remember you at all now. Your chivalry is pointless. She's already mine." Alexander glanced at Camille, his face brimming with triumph. Frank pursed his lips, looking displeased. For the past 3 years, he had been Camille's invisible shadow. Upon learning Camille liked Alexander, he voluntarily stepped back, choosing to silently protect her. But Alexander always saw him as a thorn in his side, frequently making things difficult for him. Camille couldn't understand their conversation, but her body instinctively moved away from Alexander. Alexander narrowed his eyes slightly and said to Camille, "Come here." Camille was extremely resistant and firmly refused, saying, "No way." Alexander gritted his teeth and said, "If you don't want to see Frank and Kevin crippled, you'd better come here." Such threats Camille had heard hundreds of times. Frank stepped forward and said, "Alexander, if you lay a hand on me, aren't you afraid the partnership between JK Group and the Anderson family will collapse?" Alexander let out a mocking laugh as he took the iron rod handed to him by a bodyguard. "Did you really think I hadn't noticed all those little tricks you've been pulling? Soon, the cutting-edge technology you rely on won't be exclusive to your Anderson family anymore." With that, he slowly advanced toward Camille and the other iron rod in hand. Before Frank could react, 2 bodyguards suddenly rushed out and pinned Frank down firmly. Alexander sneered and swung the rod straight at Frank's legs. Ah! A piercing scream filled the silent hospital lobby. Frank clutched his left leg, collapsing to the ground in agony. Camille widened her eyes in disbelief. "Alexander, have you gone mad?" She immediately crouched down to examine Frank's injury. "Are you okay?" Frank turned pale with pain, his forehead covered in cold sweat. He looked down at his left leg, where a faint trace of blood seeped through the black dress pants. With great difficulty, he forced out a few words from his throat. Must be a fracture. Alexander shook the iron rod in his hand and sneered. I hate it most when someone touches what's mine. Frank, this is just a warning. As soon as the words fell, Camille was yanked up by the bodyguards and forcibly dragged behind Alexander. Frank's eyes filled with ferocity, growled unwillingly. Alexander looked down at him with disdain, let out a mocking laugh, and left with a group of people. Frank clenched his teeth, staring intently at Alexander's retreating figure, silently swearing in his heart, he must bring Alexander down, no matter what. On the other side, Camille snapped back to reality, staring at Alexander's profile, a chill running down her spine. She knew Alexander's methods, but never imagined he would act so recklessly, utterly disregarding others. Noticing Camille's gaze, Alexander turned his head and smiled at Camille. I told you, if you run away again, I'll destroy every place you've been, including the people. Camille bit her lip hard, glaring at him with hatred. You beast. Alexander's eyes darkened slightly, the curve of his lips devoid of any warmth. Even with amnesia, you're still the same. You called me a beast before you lost your memory too. Do you remember how I punished you back then? I forced myself on you. As he spoke, Alexander grabbed Camille's chin. Do you want to experience it again? Camille tearfully gritted her teeth and said, I'd rather die. Alexander gazed at her face, momentarily dazed. The Burton family's tragedy and Camille's face at this moment seemed to overlap. The same hatred, the same unwillingness. Alexander suddenly recalled that document investigating his parents' deaths. He felt an inexplicable panic in his heart. Without regard for the others, Alexander left in a hurry with car keys in hand, his eyes filled with a trace of panic. JK Group. Inside the president's office, Assistant Buck stood in place, his heart filled with unease. Alexander had a dark expression, his words dripping with anger. What do you mean you still can't find anything? Assistant Buck lowered his head and replied nervously. We could only find some fragmented information. Nothing concrete enough to identify anyone. Alexander clenched his fist, knowing someone was deliberately muddying the waters, but who would obstruct his investigation other than the murderer, unless the ones who killed his parents back then weren't the Burton family at all. At this thought, Alexander felt his blood run cold. Impossible. It was Devon who personally told him the murderer was from the Burton family. He saw it with his own eyes and even produced his father's belongings from the suicide scene. Alexander froze. The ones who could obtain his father's belongings weren't just eyewitnesses. It could also be the murderer. He abruptly stood up and ordered his assistant Buck, investigate the family, especially Devon. Catherine must not be overlooked either. Right now, he only hoped things weren't truly as he feared. If it were true, then he and Camille. Alexander snapped back to reality and looked up to see his assistant Buck still standing there. He couldn't help but frown. What are you still doing here? Only to see assistant Buck no longer wearing a timid expression on his face. Mr. Alexander, I'm sorry, I'm Mr. Devon's man. The temperature in the office instantly dropped to freezing. Alexander darkened his face and gritted his teeth, saying, What did you say? Assistant Buck put down the tablet in his hand and smiled very appropriately. Sorry, Mr. Alexander, I am working for Mr. Devon. Alexander stared at him with gloomy eyes. So, what were you hiding by my side for so long? Assistant Buck no longer concealed anything and admitted frankly, your documents, as well as the seal, are now in the hands of Mr. Devon. In other words, Mr. Alexander, you will soon be removed as president by the board of directors. Alexander slammed the desk hard. He took a deep breath, suppressing the fury within. So the murderer mentioned in the documents was indeed Devon, and you deliberately erased his name for him. Assistant Buck maintained an unchanged smile, the implication of which was self-evident. Alexander couldn't help but laugh in sheer exasperation. All these years, he had actually been working for the murderer who destroyed his entire family, and even targeted the innocent Burton family, leaving them ruined and bereaved. The thought of having served his family's killer as a father figure for so many years made it impossible for him to restrain his violent rage. At that moment, several bodyguards appeared at the office door. Assistant Buck smiled and said, Escort Mr. Alexander back. Immersive translate. Inside the private hospital, Camille was escorted back to her room by the bodyguards, where Auntie Emily had been waiting for some time. When she saw Camille's pale face, she hurriedly stepped forward with concern. Miss, are you all right? Camille kept thinking about Frank's injuries, her mind wandering at the moment. She glanced at the bodyguards stationed at the door, silently cursing Alexander twice in her heart. Supported by Auntie Emily, she returned to the hospital bed. Her gaze at Auntie Emily filled with helplessness. What should we do, Auntie Emily? Alexander already knows my brother is still alive. Will something happen to him? Camille kept regretting in her heart that she shouldn't have left with Frank. That way Frank wouldn't have gotten into trouble. Camille's current state also made Auntie Emily feel guilty. After all, it was she who told Kevin's whereabouts to Alexander. But confessing now wouldn't do any good. Auntie Emily composed herself and gently comforted. The young master is so outstanding, he definitely won't be caught easily. Miss, you should get some sleep now, or the young master would worry if your health deteriorates. Camille reluctantly lay down. Soon, heavy drowsiness weighed down her eyelids. The next day, Camille was awakened by the sound of an argument. As she got up, she saw Auntie Emily being stopped by two bodyguards at the door. Auntie Emily still arguing with them about something. She listened carefully. Auntie Emily said angrily, "I'm handling matters for the master. How dare you stop me?" The bodyguard responded, "No one is allowed to leave now." Auntie Emily raised her voice, "I'll report this to the master." "Where is the master?" The bodyguards all fell silent at this moment. Camille was left speechless by Auntie Emily's words. What does it mean to work for Alexander? Isn't Auntie Emily a member of the Burton family? She whispered softly, "Auntie Emily." Auntie Emily paused noticeably at the sound but hesitated to turn around. Camille felt her breath catch at the sight, still unwilling to give up as she asked, "What you just said, it doesn't mean what I think it means, right, Auntie Emily?" Seeing no way to hide the truth, simply confessed, "I'm sorry, miss, I truly am Mr. Alexander's person." Camille rushed forward in agitation, grabbing Auntie Emily's collar and hissing, "So it was you who told him about my brother?" Auntie Emily guiltily turned her head away, offering no reply. Camille screamed, "Do you have any idea that by telling Alexander, you're signing my brother's death warrant?" Auntie Emily shed a tear, whispering "I'm sorry" repeatedly. Camille released her and sat on the hospital bed as if her heart had died. "Auntie Emily, leave, don't ever appear before me again." Hearing this, Auntie Emily was shocked. "Miss." Camille closed her eyes in disappointment and turned her back to her. The bodyguard, seeing this, chose to report everything to the higher-ups. Soon, an unexpected figure appeared at the hospital room door. "Catherine." The bodyguards immediately greeted the person respectfully, saying, "Mrs. Catherine." Catherine waved for the bodyguards to leave. Auntie Emily was also taken away. "I never expected." "Camille, you look so disheveled now." Camille turned to look at her, her gaze icy cold. "What are you here for? If you're looking for Alexander, I don't know." Catherine let out a light laugh upon hearing this. "Why do you assume I'm here to see Alexander?" Camille frowned. "If not, then what? What else could you possibly want from me? Pretending to be close sisters is pointless now." Catherine crossed her arms and shook her head slightly. "I'm only here to tell you that Alexander is nothing more than a figurehead CEO now. The real power in JK Group lies with my father." Camille showed no surprise on her face, instead asking coldly, "So then, where have you people arranged for Alexander to go?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Let him go back to the Carter family and rest properly." Camille scoffed. Who would have thought that the wheel of fortune turns so unpredictably? She was previously held under house arrest by Alexander at the Carter family's place, and now Alexander is being confined by Catherine and the others at the Carter family's place. The height of irony. Camille looked up at her, speaking calmly. "So from the very beginning, you were just using Alexander, exploiting the Burton family's regard for Alexander to bring down the Burton family, and then destroy Alexander." Catherine put on a deliberately troubled expression. "At first, I genuinely liked Alexander. But what could I do? He chose to be with you, so now you can be stray dogs locked up together. Isn't that perfect?" Camille sneered. "So it was just a failed negotiation. How laughable." Catherine saw Camille looking so nonchalant, and it made her feel extremely irritated. She lifted Camille's chin with her slender, manicured nails and said, "If it weren't for Alexander, you'd already be underground reuniting with the Burton family." Camille curled her lips into a smile, showing not a trace of fear. "So you came here today to kill me?" Catherine's eyes flashed with a dark glint as her hand tightened. "As long as you live, the group will never know peace. You're in my way. Anyone who stands in my way shall die." Catherine forcefully shook off Camille, grinning viciously as she said, "When the time comes, we'll pin your death on Alexander, and my family will smoothly take over JK Group. Camille clenched her fists tightly, her eyes burning with fury. Soon, Assistant Buck handed a fruit knife to Catherine. Catherine chuckled lightly. I'll give you a chance now. Go ahead and kill yourself. Make it quick. Camille looked at her as if she were a fool. Why would I kill myself just to please you? Are you insane, or am I? Catherine darkened her expression, threw the knife to the ground, and snorted. Since Camille won't cooperate, Assistant Buck, you do it. Assistant Buck nodded in acknowledgement. Yes, miss. Soon, Catherine left with her entourage, leaving only Assistant Buck and Camille in the spacious ward. As their eyes met, Camille smiled and said, I never expected Devon to be so resourceful. Actually placing you by Alexander's side. Assistant Buck maintained a serious expression. Miss Camille, you flatter me. With that, Assistant Buck walked slowly toward Camille, pulling out a bottle of sleeping pills from his pocket along the way. Camille sneered at the sight. You came well prepared. Assistant Buck smiled faintly. This way, the young lady won't suffer as much in death. So, Assistant Buck opened the medicine bottle and poured all the pills into his palm. He stepped forward and covered Camille's mouth, forcing countless pills into it. Soon, Camille felt her limbs grow weak and her eyelids unbearably heavy. Her stomach churned violently, gradually, before her consciousness faded. She caught a glimpse of Assistant Buck's retreating figure. This time, she was really going to die, wasn't she? Great. Camille opened her eyes again, meeting a pair of worried eyes. Before she could speak, a flood of memories suddenly surged into her mind, nearly causing her to faint. Kevin saw her gaze become unfocused and immediately went to fetch a doctor. Brother. Camille was dazed, taking a long moment to snap back from her memories before murmuring, Didn't I die? Kevin's voice sounded by her ear. Camille, how are you feeling now? Camille blinked, and it took 2 or 3 seconds before she felt her brain start functioning again. She had just managed to connect the memories from this period with those from before, and was still feeling a bit dazed. Kevin helped her sit up against the bed, and only then did Camille realize she wasn't in the hospital. Good thing I arrived in time, otherwise you really would have. Camille recalled what had happened in the hospital room that day and shook her head slightly, saying, Alexander found you, and Devon and the others must know too. They might come after you soon. If my brother really dies because of me again, I truly won't be able to go on living. The siblings embraced, immersed in sorrow, when a knock was heard at the door. Seated in a wheelchair, Frank slowly entered the room with a warm smile. Camille, how are you feeling now? Camille's gaze instantly fell on Frank's left leg cast, and she choked up. Your leg? Frank shook his head. I'm fine. The doctor said it's just a fracture, and it'll heal in 2 months. Camille let out a guilty tear. I'm sorry, it's all because of me. The Burton family's downfall, the death of family members, Frank's injury, all because of her. Frank's gentle voice carried an undeniable tone. It's not your fault, it's Alexander's. He looked out the window, his frameless glasses glinting coldly. I'll make him pay. At this moment, Kevin also spoke up. Now that Devon is in power but hasn't pursued me further, it's very likely Alexander didn't pass on my information to them. We can use this to reconnect with our previous contacts. Camille listened in confusion. Are they from the company? Kevin flashed a hint of amusement in his eyes. And who might you be? Camille frowned slightly, but it was quickly smoothed away by Frank reaching out to soothe her. Those uncles. Kevin shook his head. It was Assistant Buck. Camille was genuinely shocked this time, her voice involuntarily rising. Assistant Buck, wasn't he? Kevin laughed. If it weren't for him, how could you be at the Anderson family's place now? Camille was completely stunned, stammering incoherently. Why would Assistant Buck help us? Kevin turned to look out the window, his voice thick with sorrow. Assistant Buck was once a student sponsored by my father. When he learned about the Burton family's misfortune, he immediately sought me out to offer his help. At the thought of Benjamin, Camille's eyes turned slightly red. Soon she composed herself and asked, So what should we do now? Kevin looked at Camille with guilt in his eyes. I can't step forward yet. I don't have enough evidence to clear things up. You'll have to face the public alone for now. Camille tightened her hands slightly, her gaze resolute. It's okay, brother, I can do it. Frank chimed in worriedly. Let's wait until Camille has rested before we take action. Kevin responded with a mix of amusement and exasperation. She's my own sister. Do you really think I'd be that harsh on her? His gaze settled on Frank, and he remarked vaguely, Some people have endured for 3 years. No need to hold back any longer. Even I can't stand to watch it. Camille, having regained her memories, naturally understood what her brother was referring to. A faint blush crept across her pale face. Frank also looked somewhat embarrassed. He quickly released Camille's hand and excused himself from the room. Only the siblings were in the room. Kevin looked at the door and smiled, saying, "Camille, what do you think of Frank?" Camille smiled wryly and said, "Brother, I've remembered everything now. There's no need to ask me in such a roundabout way." Kevin's eyes lit up for a moment as he asked directly, "Then what are your thoughts?" "I can see Frank's sincerity. He's truly devoted to you." Camille also remembered Frank's helping hand during the Burton family's crisis, and her heart warmed. She lowered her head and whispered softly, "I'm not made of stone. I can't turn a blind eye to what he's done for me, but I'm no longer worthy of being with him." Kevin frowned upon hearing this. "Camille, why would you think that?" Even with the Burton family's troubles, Frank has never cared about social status. Camille shook her head. "No, brother, that's not what I meant." Kevin only then noticed Camille's collar bearing a fading fingerprint mark, his breath catching. His eyes gradually reddened as he pulled Camille tightly into his embrace. Heartbroken, "It's all right. Your brother is here for everything." Camille could no longer keep up the pretense upon hearing this. Tears streaming down her face. "Brother, I'm so full of hatred. Alexander is nothing but a beast. He humiliated me in front of so many people. He's a beast." Listening to Camille's hysterical sobs, Kevin clenched the hand behind Camille's back tightly. He stared into the distance, his voice low. "Trust me, brother will avenge you, along with Mom and Dad's." Half an hour later, Camille had cried herself to exhaustion in Kevin's arms and soon fell into a deep sleep. Kevin gently placed Camille back on the bed, then turned and left the room. Inside the study, Kevin had just walked through the door when he was immediately met with Frank's question. "Camille, how is she?" He sighed, his eyes filled with resentment. "She just fell asleep." That ungrateful Alexander must have done something else to Camille. Her emotions are still unstable. Frank's eyes flashed coldly upon hearing this. "I won't let him get away with it." Kevin pressed his lips together and picked up a few contracts from the desk to flip through. "Is the stock transfer agreement in order?" Frank nodded, still looking somewhat hesitant. "Are these empty promises of yours really feasible?" Kevin let out a cold laugh. The Burton family has only been in turmoil for a short time, yet the leadership has already changed 2 or 3 times. It shows the board is just a facade, probably long since turned into a plaything for either Devon or Alexander. "It's time for a reshuffle," Frank pondered, then asked, "What about Camille? How do you plan to involve her?" Kevin spoke with a grave tone. "I intend to have her represent me in negotiations with those people." Immersive translate. The next morning, Camille opened her eyes with some confusion, only remembering after a few seconds that she had escaped Alexander's control. There was a knock on the door. "Camille, are you awake?" Camille got up and opened the door. "Brother, what's the matter?" Kevin looked somewhat displeased. "Alexander wants to meet with us, saying he can give us the shares." Camille paused in her movements. "What?" Kevin noticed her reluctance and said gently, "It's fine, if you don't want to go, just stay home and wait for me to return." Camille lowered her eyes. "He wants to see me, doesn't he?" Kevin felt a lump in his throat as he looked at his emaciated sister, his heart aching too much to speak. Soon, Camille lifted her head to look at him again, a smile curling at the corners of her lips. "Since we can get the shares for free, why not go for it?" Kevin witnessed this with a mix of complex emotions. Camille was the Burton family's beloved young lady, doted on by everyone. Yet now she could endure humiliation for the sake of revenge. Kevin sighed and said, "Then get changed and come downstairs. We'll go after breakfast." Immersive translate. 2 hours later, at the Carter residence. Camille looked at this cage that had imprisoned her for days, her body involuntarily beginning to tremble. Kevin quickly embraced her upon seeing this. "Camille, don't be afraid." Enveloped in warmth, Camille took a deep breath. She looked up and saw Alexander standing not far away. Alexander appeared noticeably thinner, wearing only a thin shirt. His gaze was heavy as he looked at Camille. "You're here." Kevin's expression darkened the moment he saw him, thinking of his sister's reaction. From the moment the two entered, Alexander's gaze never left Camille. His eyes seemed to glisten with tears, and the next second he turned away, saying, "Come in and talk." In the study, as soon as the three entered, Kevin warily asked, "Why is no one watching you?" Hearing this, Alexander paused mid-step and said self-deprecatingly, "Because in their eyes, I'm already a discarded pawn." Camille said coldly, "So the shares you mentioned were just a pretense?" Alexander turned to look at her, his tone tinged with urgency. "No, I do have shares, and once you obtain them, you'll quickly gain JK Group's decision-making power." Kevin had a cold glint in his eyes, feeling as if a fire was burning in his heart. Devin has leverage over you. Evidence that you killed my parents. I'm not wrong, am I? Alexander froze for a moment, instinctively observing Camille's expression. Sure enough, Camille's eyes were filled with hatred, so much that it nearly overflowed. Alexander struggled to speak. Back then, I didn't know the truth. I truly believed Benjamin had killed my parents. I never expected it was actually Devin who was the thief crying stop thief. Camille didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Because of a misunderstanding, Alexander ruined her entire family and even treated her as a plaything, subjecting her to cruel abuse. Camille was furious and stepped forward to slap him. You don't deserve to say my father's name. Alexander's head was knocked sideways, a bright red palm print quickly appearing on his left cheek. He closed his eyes in despair. He had long anticipated it. After what he did to the Burton family, Camille would never forgive him. Camille was so furious she nearly laughed at his resigned expression, as if he was ready to accept any punishment. She must have been blind to have ever fallen for such a thing. Kevin grabbed Camille and coldly demanded, "So when are you giving us the shares?" Alexander looked despondent as he pulled out a share transfer agreement from the desk drawer. On the last page, Alexander's signature was already in place. Kevin picked up the pen, but just as he was about to write, Camille stopped him. Wait. Camille fixed her sharp gaze on Alexander and said, "Devin already knows you've discovered the truth. How could he possibly let you transfer the shares to us?" The two people in the room were stunned, realizing the validity of this point. Camille turned to look at Kevin. "Brother, without these shares, do we have a chance to take back the company?" Kevin pondered for a moment, then nodded. Devin isn't widely accepted in his position. In reality, the shares are still in Alexander's hands. Devin just exploited a loophole. Camille turned to leave upon hearing this. "In that case, let's have Alexander write a guarantee, ensuring he won't use these shares to support the Sue family." Kevin also thought the plan was feasible and looked up at Alexander. "In that case, write a guarantee. I don't trust you." Alexander let out a bitter laugh and mocked himself. "It's my fault for misjudging people. Compensating you now is only right." Hearing this, Camille couldn't suppress her anger and snapped, "Compensation? Alexander, have you no shame? When my father took you under his wing, what did you have? Everything you possess now was given to you by the Burton family. And now you dare talk about compensation? Do you even have any decency left?" Kevin's gaze was equally hostile. Alexander looked at Camille, her entire demeanor bristling with hostility. Guilt, remorse, and regret weighed so heavily on him that he could barely breathe. Soon, Kevin took the guarantee letter, glanced up at Alexander and said, "Let's go." Camille turned to leave the room upon hearing this. Alexander suddenly called out to her, "Camille." Camille responded coldly, "What else do you want?" Alexander gazed at her profile and said softly, "After this is over, I'll turn myself in at the police station." Camille didn't respond, only let out a cold laugh before walking away briskly. Camille followed Kevin as they left the Carter family villa. After getting into the car, Camille asked anxiously, "Brother, without the leverage of the shares, what bargaining chip do we have left to defeat Devin?" Kevin gazed expressionlessly at the scenery flashing past the window and said, "Devin has done plenty of shady things. The Carter family is just one of them. As long as we have evidence to expose Devin, he's finished." Camille frowned tightly upon hearing this. But the incident with the Carter family alone happened years ago. Would there still be any evidence? Kevin chuckled lightly and reached out to pat Camille's head. "Silly girl, do you really think your brother wouldn't be prepared?" Hearing this, Camille's eyes lit up. "Brother, you've already found it." Kevin nodded. "When I was first taken in by Frank, I didn't know about this either. I kept thinking of reaching out to the uncles who were close to my father, but they..." Kevin let out a cold laugh. Camille could guess what had happened. Those people were purely profit-driven. Seeing the Burton family fall, they swiftly cut ties to avoid getting burned. Kevin seemed to recall something, his expression suddenly turning grim. If they had just stood by and watched, that would have been one thing, but they actually tried to take a share of the spoils. Camille frowned slightly. "So what do we do now?" Kevin gazed ahead and whispered, "We're just missing the final piece of key information. Frank is already investigating it. We should have the results by tonight." Immersive translate. Late at night, inside the study, the Burton siblings had been waiting in the study for a long time. Finally, the study door opened. Frank rushed over with a thick stack of documents. "We found everything." Hearing this, Camille and the others' eyes practically lit up. Kevin quickly stepped forward. "That's great. Well done, Frank." Frank shook his head. No need to be so polite with me. I'm just glad I could help. The three of them looked through the materials in their hands, which were all about Devon's shady dealings over the years with small businesses and the Carter family, among others. Camille never expected that Devon, despite being so tightly controlled by his father all these years, could still commit such heinous acts. After finishing, the study fell into a brief silence. After a moment, Kevin said to Camille, "Print several copies of these documents. Tomorrow, Camille, take these materials to confront Devon first. Propose terms like asking for shares or entry into the company as a trade to lower his guard." Camille nodded. "I understand," Kevin continued. "I'll organize this evidence and send it to the police. Meanwhile, we'll coordinate with the media in advance, having them wait downstairs at the company to capture the moment Devon gets arrested." Immersive translate. The next morning, JK Group CEO office. The secretary entered the office with a complicated expression. "Mr. Devon, Miss Camille wants to see you." Catherine was sipping coffee when she heard this, looking astonished. "Miss Camille, Camille." The secretary nodded nervously. "Yes, it's Camille." Devon suddenly let out a scoff. "What does she want? To beg for mercy?" Catherine also responded with a disdainful smile upon hearing this. She glanced at the secretary and said dismissively, "Let her in. I want to see what tricks she can still pull off. Now the entire JK Group belongs to her Sue family." Camille, a mere young lady, could hardly turn the tide and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, could she? This is simply the biggest joke of all. Soon, a knock was heard at the office door. Camille was dressed in a custom-tailored suit, smiling. "Uncle Devon." "Oh no. I mean Mr. Devon, did you miss me?" The atmosphere in the CEO's office was tense and charged. Devon leaned back in his chair, squinting slightly as he openly scrutinized Camille. Catherine, unlike her father, couldn't contain herself. She stepped forward, grabbing Camille's wrist and gritting her teeth as she said, "What are you doing here?" Camille swiftly shook off the hand, her expression defiant. "I'm here to see Mr. Devon. Don't let just any random nobody try to talk to me." Catherine was so furious she almost exploded. "You bitch." As she spoke, she raised her hand to strike Camille. Devon sharply ordered in a low voice, "Stop." Catherine turned around in shock to look at Devon, protesting indignantly. "Dad, how can you indulge this bitch?" Devon stared fixedly at Camille and said in a deep voice, "Miss Burton wouldn't be so brainless as to rush here just to vent, would she? What do you want?" Camille walked to the desk with a smile and took out 2 documents from her bag. "I think the contents of these 2 documents will interest Mr. Devon." Devon looked at the documents, unable to see through Camille's intentions for the moment. He opened the file with skepticism, only for his expression to drastically change the next second. "How could you possibly know?" The file slipped from his hand, its contents unmistakably revealing Devon's evidence of forcing Alexander's parents to their deaths. Catherine also sensed something amiss. Picking up the file and taking a closer look, her face instantly turned pale. "How could?" Camille maintained a perfectly composed smile. "Well, Mr. Devon, are you satisfied with my fire goods?" Devon broke into a cold sweat, eyeing Camille warily. He realized he had underestimated this Burton family young lady who never interfered in company affairs. The next second, Camille clapped her hands, and 2 secretaries walked into the office carrying a stack of documents. Devon widened his eyes in disbelief, his voice stammering. What is this?" Camille smiled with deep meaning. "If you don't want others to know, don't do it in the first place, Uncle Devon. Have you forgotten what you did before?" She turned sideways and gestured towards the 2 stacks of documents. "These are all Uncle Devon's past wrongdoings and evidence, you see." Catherine never expected that the seemingly naive young lady Camille, who had always appeared innocent in front of her, would now strike at their weakest point with such precision, leaving her momentarily frozen. Devon could no longer stay seated upon hearing this. He quickly strode towards Camille and snatched the documents from the secretary's hands, tossing them aside. "You think these old, rotten matters can bring me down? Dream on." Devon flashed a vicious glare in his eyes, grabbing Camille's hand. "Guards, come in and keep an eye on this woman." As soon as the words fell, several black-suited bodyguards poured in through the door, surrounding Camille in a circle. Devon immediately tried to leave the office to find someone to clean up his mess. Camille saw through Devon's intention and couldn't help but laugh. "Mr. Devon, you don't actually think you can clean up all those matters in just a few days, do you?" Devon turned around upon hearing this, seeing Camille's disdainful expression. Veins bulged on his forehead as he raised his hand to slap Camille. At that moment, the office door opened again. Kevin walked slowly into the office wearing a well-tailored custom suit. Followed by a group of people, he glanced around and walked over to Camille. "Let me see who dares to lay a finger on the Burton family's young lady." As these words were spoken, everyone present instinctively held their breath. Kevin radiated an intimidating aura that made people shrink back. He turned his head to look at Devon, forcing a smile, but his eyes were ice-cold. "Mr. Devon, long time no see." Chapter 35. Catherine glared venomously at Kevin. "You're actually still alive," Kevin said with a dark expression and a slight smirk. "How could I die in peace without getting rid of you and Devon, these two cancers?" Catherine clenched her fists and stepped forward, ready to retort. Devon reached out to stop her, his eyes shadowed as he glared at the two. "It's too late for you to show up now. The company already belongs to our Sioux family." Kevin raised an eyebrow, hands in his pockets, looking utterly confident. "Is that so?" No sooner had the words been spoken than a commotion erupted outside the door. Bang! The office door was forcefully pushed open from the outside. Police officers stormed into the office, their expressions grave as one announced, "Devon and Catherine, you're both suspected of violating commercial law. You'll need to come with us now." Devon and Catherine were still in a daze when the police handcuffed them. Catherine snapped to realization, turning to glare at Camille. "This was your doing." Camille crossed her arms, wearing a mocking expression. "So what if it was?" "What? Feeling embarrassed about being ousted before you even warmed the seat? You'll be even more humiliated when you face court next." Catherine fumed. "You, behave yourself and come with us for questioning," the police officer sternly reprimanded. As they were being forced into the police car, Camille clearly saw Devon's defeated expression. Realizing he must have known all hope was lost, Camille couldn't help but let out a scornful laugh. If only they had known better, they wouldn't have come to this. In the following days, Kevin finally reappeared in everyone's sight. Almost everyone was shocked, never expecting Kevin to still be alive. Kevin within just a few days of returning as CEO. He carried out a sweeping overhaul of the board with decisive actions. From then on, JK Group was back in the hands of the Burton family. With the company matters settled, what remained was the feud between Alexander and the Burton family. Kevin submitted the evidence of Alexander's criminal activities, which he had gathered during this period, to the police. Soon after, Alexander was also arrested for investigation. Alexander on the day he was taken away. His gaze at Kevin was filled with reluctance, as if parting from someone dearly beloved. To this, Kevin could only feel disgust. After dealing with Alexander, the siblings visited the crematorium once more. Upon learning that their parents' ashes were still intact, both of them felt a deep sense of relief. Back then, Catherine had taken Kevin to that suburban forest merely as a ruse to provoke Camille. The two buried Mr. Burton and Ms. Burton's ashes in a private cemetery. Finally feeling their heavy hearts at ease, as they stood before the new gravestone, both of them had tears welling up in their eyes. "Mom and Dad, we've avenged you. Rest in peace now. Brother and I are doing fine. Don't worry about us." After venting their emotions at the cemetery for a long time, Frank found them with severely swollen, red eyes when he came to pick them up. Afterwards, the Burton family's old mansion began reconstruction, and everything started moving in a positive direction. Late night, in the study, Kevin looked grave, unwilling to give up. "Are you really not considering staying with the company?" Camille shook her head. "You can handle it, brother. I don't want to add to your troubles," Frank chimed in to explain. "There's no need to rush this now. Let Camille catch her breath first. As for Alexander's previous matter, I think it might be good to consult a psychologist," Kevin asked with a concerned expression. "Camille, are you okay?" Camille smiled and said, "I'm fine." Kevin nodded. "Then I'll save a spot for you. You can come back anytime when you're ready," Frank chimed in. "Don't worry, I'm still here, aren't I?" Kevin raised an eyebrow at him, smiling without a word. The two men seemed to be secretly communicating with their eyes. Meanwhile, Camille looked at them in confusion. What were these two planning now? That day, JK Group Vice President's office. Camille was handling the documents in her hand when the office door was gently knocked. Without looking up, she said, "Come in." As the door opened, a burst of noise came from outside. Camille looked up at the sound and instantly widened her eyes. Ahead, Frank stood at the forefront, holding a vibrant bouquet of red roses in his hand. Behind him, a group of company employees watched her with excited gazes. Camille hesitantly asked, "You?" Frank approached with a smile and knelt on one knee before her. "Camille, I know a lot has happened, and you might still be processing everything. but I don't want to wait any longer. I can't bear to see you cry anymore. I want to be the one who stands by your side and protects you always." Camille was momentarily speechless. But the people around them had already started cheering. A senior employee at the company saw the situation and shooed everyone out. Leaving the office for the two of them alone, after a long moment of silence between them, Camille bitterly asked, "Don't you mind that I was previously imprisoned by Alexander?" Frank's gaze was resolute. "I chose you, not anything else. If a man would give up on you for such shallow reasons, he never deserved to be with you in the first place." Camille's eyes reddened slightly as a single tear uncontrollably rolled down her cheek. She slowly reached out, choking back a sob, and said, "I will marry you." Immersive translate. Over the next month, Camille and Frank began preparing for their engagement party. It was said that Frank couldn't wait to announce their relationship to the world, but Camille just found it amusing. During the preparations, Alexander's sentencing results were finally announced. Regarding this, Kevin didn't hide his disgust at all, saying, "He hasn't given up yet and insists on seeing you." Camille neither agreed nor disagreed, simply laughing and saying, "I'm busy right now, with so much to do for the engagement party." The next day, in the prison visitation room, Camille looked at Alexander with a complicated expression. "Do you still need something from me?" Alexander forced a weak smile. "I've never properly apologized to you all this time. I'm sorry." Camille took a slight breath, then calmly said, "Is there any point in talking about this now?" Alexander felt increasingly bitter at the sight. Once, his relationship with Camille wasn't just a pretense. His heart had unknowingly been filled by Camille. His eyes slightly reddened, his voice full of regret. "If only I had known the truth back then." Camille coldly interrupted him. "Enough, Alexander. There's no turning back once the arrow leaves the bow. No room for regrets in this world." Alexander lowered his head in dejection and fell silent. Camille gazed at him for a long moment before finally pulling out a gilded invitation from her bag. "Though you can't come, I still wanted to tell you. Frank and I are getting engaged." As the words fell, Alexander looked up at her in shock. His pupils trembling, he wanted to say something, but his lips parted and closed without uttering a single sound. Camille stood up, turned around, and said, "You should focus on reforming yourself from now on. I hope we never meet again." With that, she left without hesitation. By the roadside, Frank stood by the car, and the moment he saw Camille, the corners of his lips curled up instantly. Camille responded with a smile, taking his hand in hers. "Let's go." Half a month later, on the day of the engagement banquet, Camille sat in the lounge flipping through documents. Frank walked in and couldn't help but feel exasperated at the sight. He reached out to take the documents, saying, "You're still handling work on your engagement day." Camille pursed her lips into a smile. "The company is so big that my brother can't manage everything alone. I have to lend a hand too." As she spoke, Camille stood up and smilingly linked arms with Frank. "Let's go. The engagement banquet is starting." The end.